potential indefinite, what people are concerned about is the potential indefinite nature of the backstop. There is no intention for that to be indefinite. There is no intention for it to be used in the first place. That is a genuine concern that is held by people across this House, and I think entirely right that the government addresses it.
Dr. Sarah Wollaston.
Speaker, the Prime Minister rightly talks about listening to young people and first-time voters. Would she accept that they voted overwhelmingly to remain? And they look at what's happening in this House and they see that this deal is Brexit, warts and all. This is as good as it gets. And isn't it time, now that we know what Brexit actually looks like as opposed to some fantasy version of Brexit, that those people get the chance to actually vote on Brexit reality rather than Brexit fantasy?
I think my honourable friend has heard my response in relation to a people's vote, a second referendum, before. I genuinely believe that we should recognise that the referendum in 2016 was the biggest exercise in democracy in our history. And we should respect those many people who went out to vote, including many who had not voted before. And I believe that if we then go back to people and say, have another think again, actually they will question the value of that democracy and the value of the vote.
Lucy Powell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. This is a political challenge for the Prime Minister, not a substantive one. And it seems that the Prime Minister's strategy is now to try and placate further the ERG wing of her own party. But isn't the truth that they are insatiable? They will not ever be satisfied. So given that the parliamentary maths of this are now so difficult, to really break this deadlock, I believe, requires different parliamentary maths and a general election.
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that I think what this country requires is us to continue to work to get a good deal over the line so we can deliver on Brexit, deliver it in a way that honours the referendum, protects jobs and livelihoods across this country. Further uncertainty and division in this country will do nothing to help people who are looking to their futures.
Sir Desmond Swain.
Essential to any successful negotiator is the ability to walk away. The backstop takes that from us. How can she change that?
I say to my right honourable friend that we are continuing, first of all, that we're continuing on the no-deal preparations, and the Cabinet, as I said earlier, will be meeting to discuss those further. Secondly, that in any circumstance, we need to ensure that there is no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. It's finding the ways that we can do that in a way that does indeed enable us to be free in a future relationship, which is the best possible deal for this country that we are looking for and striving to achieve.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister talks about faith in democracy, but I think a lot of people, whether they voted Leave or Remain, looking at this shambles today, will see a Prime Minister who's tried to keep economic advice from this House and from the public, has tried to keep legal advice from this House and the public, and a government that's been found in contempt. She's trying to prevent us having a vote on her own deal, and she's trying to prevent us having a vote on whether or not she should be able to have a vote on that deal or not. People are going to be looking at this aghast, and I've spoken to many Leave voters in my constituency. I deeply respect and understand the reasons why they voted Leave in 2016, but many of them have changed their mind. And they're looking at this, they're saying to me that they want a chance to have a say on what is before them, Brexit reality, not Brexit fantasy, and that is why we need a people's vote.
I say to the honourable gentleman, he is wrong, of course, because we did provide economic analysis for this House. We published economic analysis, we published the legal position in relation to the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration that has been available for members of this House, and he talks about the vote as if there is no vote in the future. Of course, we are deferring the vote while we have these further discussions with the EU.
Mrs. Anne Main.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister cannot fail to notice that there are plenty of challenges, legal challenges, surrounding Brexit, whether or not it was the fact that the referendum was legally binding, whether or not we could take Article 50 off the table. So My concern is that any reassurances or assurances given will only be subject to legal challenges down the road if they are not legally binding. Therefore, assurances and reassurances will not make a difference to how I feel about the flaws in this particular withdrawal.
No, can I say to the Honourable Lady, I entirely recognise the point that she is making about legal position in relation to any assurances that are achieved. Obviously, we are at the beginning of the discussions with the European Union on this matter, but what I want to ensure is that members like my honourable friend are able to have the confidence in those assurances when they come back from the European Union.
Mr. David Lammy.
There's no one currently in the House who has been Prime Minister. Does she appreciate that other Prime Ministers under pressure did not delay their legislation? Margaret Thatcher didn't delay after poll tax. Tony Blair didn't delay the Iraq War decision. John Major didn't delay Maastricht. Prime Minister, she knows that when the politics of this place is broken, you either resign, you go back to the people in a general election or a referendum. No one gets to play for extra time before the game is over.
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman that the whole premise of his question, I think, was wrong, and I think if he looks back in the history of this of governments in this country, he will see that.
Greg Hands.
The Prime Minister in her statement said that the government will step up its work in preparation for a possible no-deal outcome, and this is very important. She said the same last month, so I'm wondering if my right honourable friend could tell us at least one action that is now taking place that wasn't taking place last month.
Yes, I'm very happy to say to my right honourable friend, we have indeed been stepping up the action that's been taken. So since I said that, HMRC has taken action in writing out to over 140,000 businesses, and indeed the Department for Health and Social Care has written out to pharmaceutical companies, for example, on the potential impact on no deal on medicines and devices.
Pat McFadden.
Speaker, the Prime Minister has come to the House to talk to us about honesty on the day when she's trying to pull a vote which she said would not be pulled in order to try to change a deal she said could not be changed. Isn't it time to be honest about the commitments this country has made to no hard border, to the Good Friday Agreement, and to not doing huge damage to our economy, and the fact that any deal, she can talk to the European Union about the backstop all day, but any deal that respects those commitments will require us to sign up to a set of common European rules over which we will no longer have any say by dint of the fact of Brexit. So isn't it time to be honest both with her backbenchers and with the public about this, instead of trying to square unsquareable circles, or even worse, hide the facts of this fundamental choice until after we're out?
We are committed to no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. We are committed to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. We are committed to a deal which actually delivers on the protection of people's jobs and livelihoods. That is the deal that we have negotiated. The right honourable gentleman refers to the issue of how one can operate on a trading basis with the European Union in relation to rules that the European Union set. Of course, what the government set out was a proposal, and this is reflected in the balance identified in the political declaration, that if you want to restrict, or if you want to reduce, if you want to remove customs checks, then it is necessary to make commitments in relation to the obligations that you're willing to sign up to. What we proposed in the proposal the government put forward in the summer was to do just that, but to ensure that Parliament had a lock on those votes. But of course there would be a consequence, and we were honest that there would be a consequence if Parliament chose not to accept those rules. That is being open with people about the consequences of their decisions.
Justine Greening.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's not yet confirmed when the meaningful vote will actually be held. My understanding from the House of Commons Library is that now the government has made a statement, as she has today, that the political agreement on the withdrawal agreement and future framework has been reached, the requirements now for the government to make a statement to the House by the 21st of January on no deal has been superseded because of her statement being made today. And in their view then, in practice, the latest date we could have a meaningful vote would then be the 28th of March. Can I ask her whether this is what she intends, and get some assurances that the delay she's talking about is a matter of days, not weeks and months?
Can I say to my right honourable friend that I do not believe the scenario that she has set out is the correct one. There is the 21st of January date, of course, has been set in legislation. There was a vote which referred to that earlier, which took place last week. So we are conscious of the requirements that places on the government. But I believe it is right that we should be recognising concerns that have been expressed in this House and attempting to find a way through those concerns and to resolve those concerns.
Seema Malhotra.
Mr. Speaker, could the Prime Minister confirm reports that over £100,000 has been shelled out by the government on Facebook ads in the last week, promoting the Prime Minister's deal that even she is not now happy with? Isn't this now an even bigger farce that with uncertainty around UK business access to EU trade arrangements and many other issues, that she seeks to sideline Parliament once again, make social media companies richer, while the country pays the price?
Prime Minister!
The Honourable Lady, no. What we have done is recognise that there is a specific aspect of the deal which is raising concerns here in this House. We will seek reassurances in relation to that specific aspect of the deal. I continue to believe that overall this deal is the right deal for the United Kingdom.
Conor Burns!
The Prime Minister has been consistent since she assumed the premiership that a bad deal will be worse than no deal. And we have had the time since June 2016 to do the preparations for us leaving on WTO terms. Yet frontbench ministers consistently refer to the eventuality of leaving without her deal as chaos. Are our preparations really so woeful?
Can I say to
Minister!
we have indeed been making those preparations, and we continue to make those preparations, and as I indicated earlier, have been stepping up those preparations. But in relation to the impact of no deal, can I say to my honourable friend, it isn't just a question of what we do in the United Kingdom. What happens at the border depends on others, as well as what preparations we make in the UK. And we cannot determine what action others will take. So there will be a consequence of leaving with no deal, particularly if that is sort of going out on a sense of ill will between us and the European Union, with no decisions that have helped to mitigate that impact of no deal. So it isn't just about what we do here, it is about what others do as well.
Steve McCabe.
If the only thing the Prime Minister has heard is that a few tweets to the backstop arrangement will do the trick, isn't it obvious that once again she's just not listening hard enough?
Prime Minister!
As I've said earlier, I recognise that the issue that has been raised about the backstop is a genuine concern for many members across this House. That is why I believe it's right that we address it.
Crispin Blunt.
On Friday, the Treasury confirmed to me that this House has approved £4.2 billion worth of planning for no withdrawal agreement, and that in terms, stability in a no-deal scenario partly depends on the EU taking a similar non-disruptive approach to planning. With the economic prosperity of one of its members, the Republic of Ireland, very closely engaged, and with £39 billion at stake, and the interests of all the EU businesses that sell twice as much to us as we sell to them, why on earth would they not be planning with us a non-disruptive move to the certainty of World Trade Organization terms and the certainty of control over our economy and our ability to make future trade arrangements?
Minister!
My right honourable friend asks why on earth wouldn't they? The fact is that the European Union has been making some of its own preparations for no deal. It has sent certain notices out in relation to certain matters, but the it has not been engaging with us on the aspect of determining or mitigating the impact of no deal on both sides of the border.
Anna Bardell.
I ask this on behalf of the many Livingston constituents of mine that have been in touch, and I'm sure many people across the UK. What the heck is going on? This is a complete and utter cluster-booter. Why is she more concerned with her own self-preservation and narrow party unity than the lives and livelihoods of my Livingston constituents? How dare she postpone this vote just because she was going to lose? Downing Street and her team have spent the last few days saying the vote was happening. How can anybody in this House, or indeed anybody in the countries of the United Kingdom, ever trust a single word that she or her government speaks? Never again.
Prime Minister.
I'll tell the Honourable Lady what's going on. What's going on is this government was working to ensure that this Parliament, that we can get over the line through this Parliament a deal that is good for the whole of the United Kingdom.
Mr. Peter Bone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Going back to what you said at the beginning of the statement, we had a very detailed business of the House motion passed. It even specified how many hours and on what days and when the vote would be. Ministers were sent out all over the country relating to that debate. Over 100 MPs have spoken already, 140 wanted to speak today. Now, it may well be that the Prime Minister is right, that this House would like to put off the vote. But it needs to be this House that decides that. And Prime Minister, I don't think so far you've answered the question whether the procedure to be used is a motion of adjourning the House, in which case this House would have a vote, or whether it's just going to be by one sort of anonymous whip saying tomorrow.
Prime Minister.
Honourable friend, that I believe it is important for the government to be listening to the comments that have come to us in relation to this specific issue and to be responding to those comments. If we want to ensure that we get a deal over the line that is good for the British people, then I believe that is absolutely the responsible approach for this government to take.
Mary Cray.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's negotiating strategy seems to be fail again, fail better, and it is not going to revive her zombie Brexit deal whenever she decides to bring it back to this House. Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, Boxing Day, it will be voted down. She talks of the will of the people, but the will of the people cannot be undermined by a vote of the people. Isn't that now what she must do?
The Honourable Lady has heard my response to the question of a further vote, a second referendum or a people's vote on this issue. And can I just gently remind members of the opposition that every one of them stood on a manifesto commitment to deliver on the referendum.
Joe Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The problem with the deal goes far beyond the backstop. May I ask my right honourable friend what she intends to do about the fact that the government's own analysis shows that every region of the country is going to be left poorer, and we're going to end up with less say over the rules governing huge swathes of our economy than we have at the moment.
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend, that actually what the government's economic analysis shows, that in delivering on the referendum, the deal, none of the proposals actually, this deal does not make us poorer than we are today. What it does, what the economic analysis shows is that if you want to honour the referendum, then the best deal for doing that and delivering for jobs and the economy is this deal.
That's not what it says. Mr. Gavin Jones.
I not only respect the result of the referendum, I accept it. The Prime Minister in her statement said that she wants a country that truly works for everybody, a country where nowhere and nobody is left behind. She's been in government now nearly 8 years, and in that time, both the previous coalition and this government has had a deliberate policy of moving resources from poorer areas, most disadvantaged areas, to some of the most wealthiest areas. It's continuing today in public funding for public health in County Durham. which will see it's been the worst hit anywhere in the country, while leafier parts of the Surrey actually gain. Now, people don't want warm words, Prime Minister. What they want action. The action, irrespective of what happens with Brexit, is in her hands now.
Prime Minister.
The honourable gentleman, that we have been putting more money into our health service. We are going to give the health service the biggest cash boost in its history, and a long-term plan that ensures the sustainability of the health service. And in the 8 years that I have been in government, under both the coalition government and this Conservative government, we've seen 3.3 million jobs being created across our country. That's good for his constituents and good for constituents elsewhere.
John Whittingdale.
My right honourable friend in her statement said that alternative arrangements making use of technology could be put in place which would render the backstop unnecessary. Will she therefore incorporate those arrangements and go back to the European Union and ask for a free trade agreement along the lines that Michel Barnier proposed and said was the only way which could ensure that her red lines weren't breached and which would deliver on what the British people voted for?
Minister.
Right honourable friend, that the alternative arrangements are indeed specifically referenced in the withdrawal agreement, and of course what we are looking for, what we have set out in the political declaration and the proposals the government has put forward, is indeed a wide-ranging free trade area. It's just a better one than the one the European Union was proposing to us.
Diana Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, I spoke in good faith on Thursday, one of the 164 members of Parliament who did. I cannot understand why the Prime Minister did not hear before that debate started the concerns that members had about the backstop and other issues. So which part of the shambles that we're in today does she most regret, and when will I be able to vote against her deal, as most of my constituents are asking me to do?
Prime Minister.
To the honourable lady, we will indeed, of course, when we have sought the reassurances from the European Union, be bringing the matter back. But I also say to the honourable lady that I think it was right that we have listened. In negotiating, we listened to concerns that have been raised by members of this House. That's why we negotiated a number of changes to the withdrawal agreement before it was agreed that recognised the temporary nature of the backstop. Those have proved not to satisfy members of this House, and it is on that basis that I will seek further assurances.
Dr. Andrew Mearson.
The Prime Minister's grit and determination to get the best deal available is truly remarkable. Does she agree with me that in the event that the European Union fails to give anything meaningful in relation to the backstop to a hard border that we all agree is not necessary and will not happen, it will not have demonstrated a scintilla of the good faith that is referenced in the political declaration?
Well, my honourable made a very interesting point about the good faith. I believe it is important that both sides move together at this point with that good faith and do negotiate, do recognise, the European Union recognises the need for further reassurance on this matter and does indeed respond to that, and respond to that positively.
Dame Louise Ellman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister told the House this afternoon that this is the very best deal that actually is negotiable with the EU. Those were her very words. Yet she now tells us she plans to go back to Brussels to plead with them to help her and get her out of this hole. This isn't a government in control. Surely we should put this issue back to the people to ask if they really want to continue with this perilous journey that will make the UK poorer.
To the honourable lady, that we have done, we have a deal agreed with the European Union. There is one aspect of it on which people require further reassurance, and it is that basis we're going back.
Mr. Shanish Bara.
Forefront on the international stage in advocating democracy. Indeed, colleagues on both sides of the House have regularly spoken in Parliament of the need for democracy in other countries. And on both sides of the House again, we regularly instruct MPs and legislators from other countries at seminars held by the CPA and IPU of the importance of listening to the people who they represent. Would my right honourable friend agree with me that to now have a second referendum would ensure that the UK loses all credibility on the international stage in speaking up for democracy?
I think my honourable friend has made a very important point. We do speak to others about the importance of democracy. I think it's important that we show an example ourselves and respect the vote that the people took.
Tom Bray.
Speaker, I'd like to ask the Prime Minister to do three things. First of all, to rule out no deal because she knows it will be extremely damaging. Secondly, to support a people's vote, if only to save her the embarrassment of when she has to support it in a couple of weeks' time. And finally, to instruct her Chief Whip to make time available for a debate on a no-confidence motion that I know the Leader of the Opposition is going to be tabling.
Well, can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he asked me to support a people's vote. The answer to that, he's heard me answer that on a number of occasions. The government will continue with its no-deal preparations because that is the reasonable things to do. And in terms of time for debates within this House, there are accepted protocols in relation to that.
Mr. Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I respect the efforts being made by the Prime Minister, but could I just ask my right honourable friend that on top of the 39 billion, if Britain is, the transition period is extended for the extra 2 years, how many extra billions will we be paying per year in that extra transition period? And will she give this House a real say in determining how much money goes to the EU in that extra transition period if it happens?
Minister.
In answer to my right honourable friend's question, first of all, the terms of that further extension of the transition period, the implementation period, were it to be the way forward, would have to be negotiated. There would be an expectation on the part of the EU for a sum of money. We would consider that it was necessary that should be fair and proportionate. Of course, this is one of the differences between the backstop as it appears in the withdrawal agreement and the extension of the transition period, in that in the backstop no financial obligation is required from the United Kingdom.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister says a people's vote would not reflect the will of the people and it would be divisive, but we do not know what the will of the people is in 2018. We are already a divided country. Nothing will divide us more and fuel the far right than a deteriorating economy. And is it not the case that notwithstanding any tweak she makes to her backstop, her deal, her withdrawal agreement will still leave us poorer relative to the current deal we have now?
Honourable gentleman, the vote took place in 2016. People voted to leave the European Union. I believe it is our duty to deliver on that.
Mr. Douglas Ross.
Much, Mr. Speaker. I am one of the hundreds of members who was hoping to participate in the debate this evening and tomorrow, and I hope, Mr. Speaker, the government have listened very closely to your guidance and allow members the opportunity to explain their views, because I would like the opportunity to explain to the people in Murray why I came to the conclusion that I could not support the Prime Minister in her deal. But could I ask the Prime Minister particularly a question that has so far been evaded from across the House? Not only do members in this chamber, but our constituents deserve to know when the vote will finally be taken. When will it be?
I say to my honourable friend, we are going to discuss with the European Union, with the other partner, with the other party to this negotiation, the requirements that we have and requirements that we are putting forward. And of course, until those discussions have properly started, it's not possible to say the length of time that it will be necessary to hold those discussions. Reference has already been made to the 21st of January date, which is within the legislation that this House has passed. I want to work as quickly and as urgently as possible with, well, my honourable friend says when, but the question, as I've just said, is we need actually to enter those discussions with the European Union, and until we have done that, it is not possible to give a date.
Mr. Speaker, an honourable member from this side of the House only said last week the government always says no before it says yes. So I'm holding my breath about the people's vote. But Mr. Speaker, I've got another question to the Prime Minister. In 2016, 17.4 million people voted to leave the EU, and the Prime Minister says her deal is delivering Brexit and the will of the people. Those honourable members on her own side who also want to leave the European Union, like the members for Uxbridge or North East Somerset or Wickham, don't believe that her deal is delivering on Brexit and on the will of the people. How many of the 17.4 million people who voted in 2016 voted for her deal?
Prime Minister.
I say to the Honourable Lady, up and down the country, the messages that I get from people, regardless of whether they voted Leave or Remain, are very simple. Deliver on the vote, get on with it, and let's move on.
Giles Watling.
Speaker, I speak as a Remainer, which is probably a dangerous thing to do in this corner of the back bench. However, I respect the results of the referendum, but I'd like to ask my right honourable friend, what has been the point of all the pain and uncertainty of the last 2 years if in the final analysis the arbitration panel still remains under the dominion of the European Court of Justice?
Can I say to my honourable friend, this is one of what I believe is a misunderstanding of the situation. The arbitration panel does not remain under the dominion of the European Court of Justice. The arbitration panel will make its own decisions. But if there is a dispute which involves an aspect or in the interpretation of European Union law, there is only one body that can interpret European Union law, and that is the European Court of Justice. So the arbitration panel will be able to ask the ECJ for their opinion on that particular point, and they, as an arbitration panel, will then determine the dispute. The European Court of Justice will not be the arbiter of that dispute.
Sammy Wilson.
Speaker. Shortly after the Prime Minister announced that there would be no vote on this issue, Michel Barnier and the Taoiseach of the Irish Republic were slapped down the idea that there would be any renegotiation of this deal. The Prime Minister may be prepared to be humiliated by arrogant EU officials and by Irish politicians. But does she not realise that every time she comes back here with her tail between her legs, she humiliates the British people? When will she stand up to the EU? And if she's not prepared to stand up to the EU, then let her have the vote of this House to tell them what we think of their rotten deal.
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that we have stood up to the European Union, and perhaps one of the very good examples of standing up to the European Union was our absolute refusal as a government to accept a customs border down the Irish Sea and to see the United Kingdom separated into two customs territories. In February, that was what the European Union wanted. They stuck to that until we had argued them out of it in October. We have stood up to the European Union. We have got a good deal for the UK.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is the duty and responsibility of every single member in this House to take our country out of the EU. And can I tell my right honourable friend that her deal does not do that? And many MPs on both sides of the House are intentionally thwarting that intention. Can I ask my right honourable friend to go back to the EU, offer a free trade agreement, and if that is not acceptable, to fall back on WTO terms and then deal with the EU outside the EU, where I am positive a deal will be struck and this poison and division will be gone.
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend, I agree with my honourable friend that I think every member of this House has a duty to deliver on the result of the referendum and take the United Kingdom out of the European Union. What is on the table within this deal, what the government has been working for, is a free trade area, a free trade agreement with the European Union, but just a better one than the basic sort of free trade agreement that has been proposed by the EU in the early stages of the negotiation.
Mrs. Helen Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said in her statement, and I agree with her, that the majority of people in this House do not want no deal. And she also knows that the ERG are a small minority in this House. So rather than writing a side letter which won't satisfy them, why doesn't she do what my right honourable friend said and agree the next step of negotiating objectives across the House?
Minister!
As I've explained to members previously, this question of the backstop and the concern of the backstop is one that is not just held by a small number of members of this House, it is held by a wide range of members and held by members across opposition benches as well as the government benches. And I believe in that circumstance we are taking exactly the right action.
Mr. David Tredynick.
Will my right honourable friend not bring this back to the House before Christmas to give members with entrenched positions a chance to reflect over the recess?
I hear what my honourable friend says. I think as I said earlier, the timing of this is rather better determined by the nature of the discussions that we have with the European Union.
Peter Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister started this process by going to the Supreme Court to stop the House of Commons having a say in starting this Brexit-led process. We're only having a vote tomorrow, because she was defeated last year in the withdrawal amendment. Isn't it true, Mr. Speaker, that she has the barefaced cheek to come before this House and lecture us about our duty to this House and our Parliament? Isn't it true that no Prime Minister is better than a bad Prime Minister?
Prime Minister!
Can I say to the honourable gentleman, what I have pointed out today to members of this House is the duty that each and every one of us has, having stood as he did on a manifesto to deliver on the result of the referendum, to do exactly that.
Lee Rowley.
Could the Prime Minister give me one example of how a political reassurance in law can ever supersede the binding words in an international treaty?
Minister!
Can I say to my honourable friend that I think he is making an assumption about what will come back from the European Union, and it is the task of the government, obviously, to look to negotiate something that will be sufficient to give the confidence to members of this House in relation to the backstop not being able to be indefinite.
Luciana Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've listened very closely to the Prime Minister's responses so far this afternoon, and I ask her, does she truly believe that the people who voted to leave 2.5 years ago did so in order to make our country poorer? And do they do so at any cost? Do they want Brexit at any cost? And if she's so sure that the majority of our country want this actual deal rather than the false promises that they were missold, why doesn't she do the most democratic thing and take her deal back to the country and give them a final say?
Prime Minister!
I say to the honourable lady that I think what people voted for was to ensure that we brought an end to free movement, which the deal does, was to ensure that we brought an end to sending vast annual sums to the European Union, which the deal does, and was to bring to an end the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, which the deal does.
James Cleverly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, honourable friends and members across the House have been expressing anecdotal and unscientific assessments of their voters change their mind about the referendum results. And in that spirit, I would like to highlight the conversations I've had with both friends and constituents who voted Remain, but are now determined that we leave the European Union in good order. So will she give me an assurance that she will go back to the EU, bang on the table if that is what it takes, and get a deal that will accord support in this House and get us out of the European Union on the 29th of March next year?
Prime Minister!
I assure my honourable friend that is exactly what we're intending to do, and he is absolutely right, and I see many messages coming into me from people who voted Remain but now say, actually we accept the result of the vote, let's get on with it and let's leave the European Union.
Mike Gates.
Mr. Speaker, the European Commission has made it absolutely clear that they are not going to reopen the 585-page withdrawal agreement. So if the Prime Minister was able to get an aspirational addendum to the political declaration, a piece of paper that she could wave when she came back. Would that mean we will definitely have a vote on Monday or Tuesday next week?
As I've said earlier, the timing of the vote will be determined by the extent of and nature of the discussions with the European Union.
Bob Stewart.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Changing tack a little, will my right honourable friend assure me that the proposed new, deep and special relationship on defence, security and intelligence matters mentioned in the draft withdrawal agreement will not affect our special dealings with other Five Eyes nations, especially the United States?
Yes, I'm very happy to give my honourable friend that absolute assurance.
Angela Smith.
Speaker, surely the Prime Minister realises that this House must be given a reasonable period of time in which to reflect on the vote and take its decision. The new year is too late. 7th of January is just 14 days before the all-important deadline. So surely the vote must come before this House, before the end of next week.
As I said earlier, obviously we will be working hard in relation to negotiations, but I'm sure honourable members of this House, as a number have indicated, would want to make sure that we are putting our case in the most forceful way.
Ellen Whately.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, I visited a haulage business in my constituency, and the owner told me how worried he is about the possibility of no deal and how it will affect his business. Does my right honourable friend agree that when we come to vote on the withdrawal agreement, we must remember not only the importance of honouring the referendum result, but also the importance of people's jobs and livelihoods that depend on trade with the European Union?
Minister.
I say to my honourable friend that I think it is very important both that we do deliver on the result of the referendum, but we recognise the need to do that in a way that enables us to leave in a smooth and orderly way, and that does indeed protect those many jobs which depend on the relationship, trading relationship with the European Union.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been reflecting on the fact that the referendum that I took part in as an 18-year-old first-time voter in 1979, in which Scotland voted to return of its parliament. If the EU referendum had been subject to the same rules, we would not be leaving now. But does the Prime Minister not accept that the difficulty in getting an acceptable trade deal, the difficulty in resolving the problem of the Irish border, is not the fault of the Irish, north or south, it's not the fault of Europe, it's the fault of the red lines that she unilaterally and unnecessarily set right at the start. If the Prime Minister will not accept that it's time for the red lines to go, surely it's time for the Prime Minister to go.
Prime Minister.
What this government has been negotiating, what is present in the deal, is a good future relationship in trading terms, in relation to the border, and in relation to not being a member of the customs union, not being a member of the single market, delivering on the vote of the referendum, and I believe that's what we should be doing for the people of this country.
Bima Falami.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I agree with my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, when she says a no deal would be bad for the UK, but it would also be bad for the European Union. And with that in mind, would my right honourable friend agree with me that the European Union, as they and their diplomats watch this debate, need to really decide whether they want a deal or not? Because without changes to the backstop, a deal will not pass this House.
My honourable friend has made an important point. I believe from all my discussions with the European Union leaders that they do indeed want a deal, but he is absolutely right. It's about recognising the concerns that remain in relation to the backstop to ensure there is a deal that this House will accept.
Mr. David Simpson.
Can I remind the Prime Minister that assurances will not deliver the people of Northern Ireland on this deal? No assurances will. And will she go further and admit tonight that in order to get the deal as far as she has got the deal, that Northern Ireland had to be made the sacrificial lamb to placate the Irish Republic and the EU?
No, that is absolutely not the case. what has happened throughout these negotiations is that this United Kingdom government has been very aware of the responsibility that we have to the people of Northern Ireland, and it is that responsibility which leads us to want to ensure that in the circumstances set out in the withdrawal agreement it will be possible to assure people in Northern Ireland that there is no hard border between them and Ireland.
Andrew Percy.
Can I say, representing a heavy Leave voting Northern constituency, and as somebody who actually lives in their constituency in the North, that my voters, Leave voters, are sick to the back teeth of being told by Remainers, people who lost the referendum, what it was they voted for. We've been told we're racists, that we're a bit stupid, a bit too Northern, and now we're being told we didn't know what we voted for. Can I say my constituents are none of those things, and what they can see going on in this place is a stitch-up by people who said they accepted the result of the referendum, who are using every single trick in the book to deny the people what they voted for.
My honourable friend speaks with passion on behalf of his constituents, and he is right to do so. And I think it is frankly unacceptable for members in this House to try to suggest to people that they simply didn't understand what they were voting for. The people of this country understood what they were voting for. They knew what they wanted in terms of leaving the European Union, and we should listen to that and deliver on it.
Mr. David Hanson.
But given it is the Prime Minister's red lines that have originally caused the problem in Northern Ireland, can she give some assurances that she will turn those lines pink to ensure we have free and frictionless trade?
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, this is a theme that has been raised by a number of members on the opposition benches. It is not the case. What we have said with Northern Ireland is that we remain committed to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, that we remain committed to no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and that we refuse to accept the European Union's approach of carving Northern Ireland out as a separate customs territory from the rest of the United Kingdom.
Hugh Merriman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has been on her feet taking questions for 11 hours with regard to this deal. It may not have escaped her attention, it's only one of my constituents, that honourable members across this House, on the one hand, speak for the people with a second referendum, on the other hand, speak for the people when they want a no deal. That can't obviously be correct. Would she agree with me that when it comes to leadership, we need the art of compromise? She has shown that, the European Union has shown that. If Parliament wishes to take control, we need to show compromise as well. Otherwise, we will be responsible for the damage that ensues to our constituents.
My honourable friend is absolutely right. In any negotiation, it is necessary to compromise. It's necessary to know what your vital interests are and to stick to these, but to be willing to compromise in order to achieve those vital interests. And it is for all of us to recognise the damage that can be done for our constituents if this House does not deliver on the referendum and do it in a way that protects people's jobs and livelihoods.
Owen Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, since the Prime Minister has been on her feet this afternoon, the pound has fallen to its lowest level since early 2017. The FTSE 250 has fallen to its lowest level for 2 years as a direct consequence of uncertainty caused by this failed brinksmanship. Isn't it grossly irresponsible of the Prime Minister to tell the country that we do not know when we will have a vote on this, and this uncertainty may continue indefinitely?
Of course, there has, and as people look at this House and hear people talking about the possibility of a second referendum, the possibility of a general election, all of which would increase uncertainty, increase division, and increase the problems of this country.
If you want. Julian Knight.
Mr. Speaker, the average Land Rover, parts and average Land Rover, cross the continent 37 times. My 9,000 car workers need an orderly withdrawal from the EU. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that ultimately, if a withdrawal agreement is rejected, we may get no deal, a permanent, not temporary Norway, or a stain on the soul of this House, a second referendum?
I think my honourable friend puts it very well, and that is why members of this House need to consider the importance of delivering on the referendum, but also the importance of doing it in a way, as he says, that actually protects people's jobs and them and their children's futures.
Yeah.
Samjima.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is right to say that this House needs to honour the result of the referendum in 2016. And that is why many of us in this House voted to embark on the Article 50 process. The Prime Minister then set her red lines in January 2017, into which we went into a general election. The direct consequence of that general election was the loss of our majority on this side of the House and the gridlock we see in Parliament today. There is no majority for any option in this House, and the Prime Minister haven't gone back to renegotiate and not got anything that this House can accept. I would say that we should not once again be boxed in by our own red lines. It's not Parliament frustrating the will of the people. The general election produced an outcome that cannot lead to a clear decision, in which case we should not be afraid to give it back to the people.
Prime Minister.
I hear the argument my honourable friend is making, but I say to him that I have answered this question of the people's vote on a number of occasions, and he talks about the views of people across this House. When the time comes, it will be for people across this House to recognise the importance of delivering on that vote that took place in 2016.
West Streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister talks about trust and faith in politics and the importance of honouring the vote in 2016. But what does she think it will do to trust in politics when those voters realise the deal she's negotiated bears so little resemblance to what they voted for? What will it do when people realise that we'll be subjected to EU rules but with no say over them? Yeah. What will it do when they realise that initially we can't trade with the rest of the world, and even when we can, it won't substitute for the trade she's sacrificed around the negotiating table? And worst of all, what will it do to trust in politics when they're feeling the pain and they're subjected to what she's negotiated and they've been given no say over it whatsoever? If she believes that this is in the national interest and it commands public support, why won't she ask the people?
Prime Minister.
People voted to end the jurisdiction of the European Court, to end free movement, to end sending vast annual sums to the European Union every year, and that is what this deal delivers.
Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, I respect the Prime Minister's efforts to try and get the reassurances on the backstop to deliver the referendum, which was, let us remember, a manifesto commitment for both Conservative and Labour members of this House. But does she agree with me that those members who hope that this leads to no deal should realise the House will not support that outcome, and any other deal will not honour the referendum in a meaningful way? Snatching parliamentary defeat out of the jaws of referendum victory would be bad for trust, but not impossible if enough members fail to get behind the government's proposals.
Absolutely.
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend has put the facts very clearly in relation to this House, and that is why I spoke in my statement of the responsibility that this House has. Responsibility to deliver on the referendum, to do it in a way that does protect people's jobs and futures, and to recognise the importance of the vote that people will take and its impact on people's trust in our politics.
Lillian Greenwood.
This morning, a prominent Nottingham business warned me that a no-deal Brexit could put them out of business. This afternoon, the Prime Minister raised the threat of an accidental no-deal. It is crystal clear that her deal cannot command a majority in this House whenever we vote on it. Isn't her time-wasting delay simply reckless?
Prime Minister.
No, and honourable members of this House who don't wish to have no deal need to recognise that the only way to have no deal, not to have no deal, is to have a deal and to agree a deal. And there is no agreement on any alternative deal in this House.
Alberto Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is one part of the agreement that it is incontestable that must be legally binding sooner rather than later, and that's the issue of citizens' rights. Can the Prime Minister reassure this House that as she speaks to EU leaders, if the ugly spectre of no deal arises, will she reinforce her efforts to ensure that a legally binding agreement on citizens' rights can be brought before this House as soon as possible?
Well, can I thank my friend? He has championed the rights of citizens' rights of those EU citizens living in the UK consistently throughout this process. Can I assure him that we have been stepping up to the plate in relation to citizens' rights in a no-deal scenario, and my right honourable friend, the exiting the EU Secretary, has reminded me that actually a notification was issued last week on that matter. But of course we should remember those 1 million UK citizens living in EU member states, EU 27 member states, and encourage other member states to extend the same generosity to those UK citizens.
Kevin Brennan.
Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister just tell the House straight, if this is true, that when she comes back with her assurances, it'll still be the case that not a single word in the 585-page withdrawal agreement will have been changed? Is that correct?
Prime Minister.
I have answered this question previously. We are going into negotiations with the European Union. We have negotiated a deal with the European Union. We are looking at ways in which it will be possible to provide the necessary reassurance for members of this House, and we will explore the options.
Mark Warman.
The constituency that voted more heavily to leave the European Union than any other. And when I talk to constituents, the feeling I get is that more people now would vote to leave than when they first had the vote in 2016. For the sake of democracy, I would be one of them now as well. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that it should fill our constituents with horror when members of Parliament who stood on manifestos to deliver Brexit now talk of a second referendum?
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend, and indeed I received messages from people who across the country voted to remain who say exactly as he has. They would now vote to leave because they believe in the importance of recognising and honouring the result of the referendum.
Leila Moran.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister today asks if this House wants to deliver Brexit. Well, I'm more interested in if my constituents do. Since she brought this deal to this House, 85% of the letters that I've received are in favour of a people's vote with the option to remain. And she further says we need to be honest about those risks. Well, I can tell her that my constituents know very well those risks. They are dismayed at the mess here, and they now consider it very much the least worst option. By denying the people of Oxford, Western Abingdon and others across this country their will, is she suggesting that they don't know what they're asking for?
No, what I am saying to the Honourable Lady and many members of this House will also be receiving responses from people across the country who are making the point that they voted in the referendum and that they expect Parliament to deliver on the result of the referendum rather than having a second vote.
Chris Phil.
Mr. Speaker, in the Prime Minister's statement earlier, in relation to the backstop, she made clear she had listened to the views of the House. That is a mark of true leadership, and she has done exactly the right thing. But the Prime Minister will also acknowledge that following the Attorney General's statement last week, many members of the House on both sides have concerns about the legally binding nature of the backstop and the fact we require European Union consent to get out of it. Does she therefore agree that any changes to the arrangements designed to reassure the House have to be legally enforceable?
I'm well aware of the concerns of the House about the legal enforceability on this issue and the desire to ensure that anything that is... what people have been saying to me is that they want to ensure that the backstop can be brought to an end, and there are various ways in which we can do that. What we need to negotiate, what we'll be discussing with the European Union, is the whole question of how we can do that in a way that does give sufficient reassurance and sufficient confidence to members of this House that they are not faced with a situation where they have one aspect of this which is under one determination and another aspect which is less secure. It's giving that confidence to members of this House that we will be negotiating.
Sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe the Prime Minister, who incidentally just last year promised us a strong and stable administration, I believe she attended a lunch today where she said she thought that her deal was the best available. What does she know now that she didn't know then?
Prime Minister.
I've been very clear that the deal, what we are looking at is one aspect of the deal which we had negotiated ways of addressing it within the withdrawal agreement. What has been proved is that the ways that were negotiated in that withdrawal agreement have not been sufficient to give confidence to members of this House. The European Union has been clear that the backstop is only temporary, but people want further confidence that it will be only temporary, that it can be brought to an end, and that's what we'll be negotiating and discussing with the European Union.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I welcome the general tenor of the Prime Minister's remarks today. When she goes to meet European leaders, we should be making clear that this is not about anyone wanting to return to the borders of the past in Ireland. This is about wanting to make sure that we will have the sovereign ability to choose our own trading destiny future, and that we won't be subject to potential vetoes on extraneous issues that are nothing to do with keeping a border open in Ireland.
No, my honourable friend puts it very well. I think it is important that we remind the European Union that we are committed to no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, but we are also committed, as they have reflected and respected in the political declaration, to having an independent trade policy. And it is important that the policies we have to deliver on no hard border enable us to operate that independent trade policy.
Stuart Malcolm MacDonald.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The art of diplomacy is known as allowing someone else to have your way. So given that failure on the government's part, when a government can't get through its central piece of legislation, shouldn't it stand aside? And if it doesn't, shouldn't the leader of the opposition put forward a no confidence motion? Because I suspect if she was sacked where the Right Honourable Member for North Islington is sacked, she would do the exact same.
Can I simply point out to the honourable gentleman, he talks about legislation. Of course, the meaningful vote is not in itself legislation. The legislation follows with the withdrawal agreement bill that we put before. He says he didn't mention it. He did actually use the term legislation in what the government is doing. What we are doing is ensuring that we have listened to members of this House and that we are holding those further discussions with the European Union to deliver on the views of this House.
Rachel McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to speak up for something that seems to be going out of fashion, which is compromise and pragmatism in order to bring the country back together. Doesn't she agree with me that members on the opposite side need to respect the manifesto that they stood on, which was to deliver the result of the referendum, stop playing party politics with their own constituents, and back the deal because they say they don't favour a no deal, and get...
Order, a lot of noise. The honourable lady must be heard. Rachel McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I merely asked the Prime Minister if she agrees that the opposition need to support her deal to deliver what they promised to their constituents.
And is absolutely right. Absolutely right. The official opposition, as the Conservative Party did, stood on a manifesto to deliver on the referendum and should do exactly that.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the light that the Prime Minister and her government have led these negotiations for 29 months, what are the exact terms the Prime Minister is wanting to negotiate with the EU this week?
I think I've answered this on several occasions. It is in relation to the backstop and ensuring that it is not permanent or indefinite, but it can only be temporary.
Bill Grant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. All members of this House are here as a result of a democratic vote. Yes. Would my right honourable friend agree that is at best mystifying that many such members refuse to honour or indeed respect the democratic outcome of the referendum, and in some cases, 2 referendums?
Can I say to my honourable friend, my honourable friend, I absolutely agree with him. Sadly, there are members of this House who appear not to want to deliver on the result of the referendum in 2016. Sadly, there are also members of this House who seem not to want to accept the result of the referendum that took place in 2014 in Scotland.
Jack Dromey.
Mr. Speaker, the government's mishandling of the negotiations has thrust the country into chaos, with growing uncertainty and deep concern in our automotive sector, including the Jaguar plant in my constituency. Mr. Speaker, we are but 3 months away from the cliff. Whatever the ultimate way forward agreed by this House is at the next stages, will the Prime Minister today rule out any question of a no-deal Brexit, because the jobs of tens of thousands of workers depend upon it.
Honourable gentleman, I've been clear that I believe that the best route forward for the UK is to leave with a good deal with the European Union. That is what we've negotiated, and that is a deal that recognises the importance of the trading relationship to many jobs across this country, including in the automotive industry. But if this House desires not to have no deal, then this House needs to accept a deal, and the best deal on the table is the one the government has negotiated.
Andrew Bowie. Very much, Mr. Speaker. Earlier on, the member for Pontypridd spoke about his concerns to the economy and what's happened to the pound today. Does my right honourable friend not agree that this is nothing as to what would happen to our economy under the economically illiterate, destructive and chaotic policies of a Labour government propped up by the SNP?
Yes, my honourable friend is absolutely right. The flight of capital and the run on the pound, which the Labour Party themselves accept would be the impact of their economic policies, would be the worst damage that could be inflicted on this economy.
Dr. Roberta Blackman-Woods.
I'm one of the few people in this House brought up in Northern Ireland during the years of conflict, and I don't ever want to see a return to that time. So how is the Prime Minister going to ensure no hard border in Ireland now or in a few years' time, and absolutely no undermining of the Good Friday Agreement that brought such welcome peace? And surely this negotiation should not be about the Prime Minister trying to persuade enough people on her own side to heave this bad deal over the line. It should be about the long-term peace and prosperity in Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK too.
It is that long-term peace and prosperity, not only of Northern Ireland but the whole of the United Kingdom, that has underpinned the approach the government has taken to the whole of these negotiations. We remain firmly committed to ensuring that the peace process that has been so important to the lives of people in Northern Ireland, that the peace that has been achieved and the development in Northern Ireland that's been achieved can continue into the future and give the people of Northern Ireland the bright future that we can also give to people across the whole of the United Kingdom. Having no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland is an important part of maintaining that process into the future.
Alex Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't the public entitled to a grown-up acknowledgement across this House that the issue of the backstop affects both policies, whether it's the Prime Minister's proposal or indeed the opposition proposal to stay in the customs union or outside the single market? Both require a backstop. Does she agree?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. Any of the alternative arrangements that have been put out in contrast to the government's deal also require a backstop. The backstop is there in the circumstances where the negotiations fail to achieve the future relationship in time at the end of the transition period, and that could happen in the negotiation of any of the agreements.
Who was that? Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This ongoing farce would be funny if it wasn't so serious for the jobs and prosperity of my constituents in Edinburgh South. The Prime Minister rightly says she wants to be honest with the public. So can she be honest? Is her deal non-negotiable?
We have negotiated the deal with the European Union, which covers many aspects over and above this issue of the backstop. The one that colleagues have, that members of this House have raised concerns about, is the particular aspect of the backstop in relation to whether or not it can be indefinite or is only temporary. And it is that specific point on which we are seeking those reassurances.
Raymond Tuesday.
Mr. Speaker, like many other colleagues, I was hoping to speak in this debate and outline my reasons why I'll be opposing this debate and voting against that. Can the Prime Minister clarify this specific point for me? She's talked about manifesto commitments. Can I refer the Prime Minister to page 36 of the Conservative Party manifesto, which says, as we leave the European Union, we will no longer be members of the single market and the customs union. How does that reconcile with the deal that we have and the Attorney General's advice on paragraph 7 on the customs union and single market?
It is indeed reconciled with the fact that the future relationship we will have with the European Union will ensure that we are not in the single market and not in the customs union. And indeed, in the withdrawal agreement in relation to the backstop in Northern Ireland will not be in the full single market. And the point about the backstop is it is only intended to be temporary. the absence coming out of the single market, coming out of the customs union, coming out of all the other aspects of the European Union membership that people voted against and wanted to see us come out of, is delivered in the future relationship we have with the European Union.
Christine Jardine.
Mr. Speaker, there are two small points from today's debate I wonder if the Prime Minister could clarify. The first is that in anticipation of speaking in this afternoon's debate, like many other members, including those on her own benches, I gauged the opinion of my constituents in Edinburgh West. Implicit in that, as in the Prime Minister's statement, that she has listened to what the House said and is going back to review the backstop, is an acknowledgement that people can change their mind. So that being the case, why is the Prime Minister not prepared to let the country see whether or not they've changed their mind? And could she please clarify the point raised by my honourable friend from Wellingborough about the mechanism she's going to use over this afternoon's debate?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady that there will be a business statement after this statement has finished, and in relation to the first point about going back to the country with a second referendum, I think I refer her to the answer I've given to the same question earlier.
Simon Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I tell my right honourable friend that in all of my discussions with businesses and farmers in my North Dorset constituency, they desperately want a deal. So I support the instincts of my right honourable friend. But given that we are told that the technology exists within the world that would deliver a robust, non-hard border, policy compliant, within the transition period, does she believe that the backstop is potentially being overblown in terms of it being anything other than the insurance policy that all parties require to safeguard that precious peace which so many right honourable and honourable members have spoken of?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right. The withdrawal agreement now references the possibility of those alternative arrangements which can deliver on the no hard border, which is so important for the peace he references, and that indeed could mean that the backstop genuinely does not need to be used. And there's been a lot of focus on the backstop, but given there's the possibility of extending the transition period and given the existence of alternative arrangements, those both make it even less likely that backstop would ever come into force.
Brexit. Yes. Christian Matheson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The tactic employed by the Prime Minister of trying to foment division between this House and the country outside is to be deeply regretted, and will only add to the problems that she's described elsewhere in her statement. Can she tell us, is the deal that is currently sitting on the table of this House now dead, since she is trying to go and renegotiate something that was previously unnegotiable?
First of all, it is not. We're not trying to foment division between this House and the people. Oh no. Every member of this House has a responsibility to understand what I believe is a duty to deliver on the vote of the referendum. A number of members of this House are indicating that they would prefer to follow a different route than delivering on that referendum vote. I believe that we have a duty to deliver on that referendum vote, and as I have explained, I believe the deal that's been negotiated is the right deal for the UK. There is this aspect in relation to the backstop on which we will be going back to the European Union.
Jim Shannon.
Prime Minister, I said during one of your previous statements that Northern Ireland will not be your sacrifice. You have stated that there must be compromise, but the state of Northern Ireland is an absolute, and the tinkering that has taken place is not acceptable. Regretfully, Prime Minister, none of your words today have reassured this House, and the gap of mistrust between yourself and myself and the DUP has grown into a chasm. It is very clear it's never been so low. So, Prime Minister, I support the majority of the UK and ask you, Prime Minister, to do what was asked of you: leave the EU as we entered it, with no backstop and on our own merits, and confident of our ability as a global power and no man's slave.
Can I say to the honourable gentleman that we do indeed want to deliver on leaving the European Union, but in doing that I want to reassure and ensure that there will be no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. I believe that that is important, as I'm sure the honourable gentleman does, for his constituents and for the future of Northern Ireland, and that should be one of the commitments we've given, and it's one of the commitments I intend to deliver on.
Alison Hewlett.
Mr. Speaker, over the weekend I've had hundreds of constituents getting in touch with me, asking me to vote down this terrible deal, this woeful deal that the Prime Minister has come back with. There is no...
Stop heckling.
You could stop interrupting.
Order. The Honourable Lady is here. I say to the Government Minister standing at the bar, be quiet. I've not the slightest interest in hearing you yelling in the background. Sit down, be quiet and listen, and if you're not able or inclined to do that, sir, order! If you're not able or inclined, don't look at me and tell me what's what or imply that you can. I say to you, be quiet, don't be discourteous to the member on her feet. If you can't be quiet, Mr. Stewart, you're most welcome to leave the chamber, and we're perfectly capable of coping without you. Alison Hewlett.
Mr. Speaker, there is no confidence in this Prime Minister's deal. She doesn't have the confidence of her backbenchers, of my constituents, or the majority of people in this House. She can't even tell us a date when this vote will return to the House. Is it not the case, Mr. Speaker, that this Prime Minister has bottled it and she should go?
No, I think I have to say to the Honourable Lady that if I was bottling it, I wouldn't have come to this chamber and have been on my feet already for nearly 2.5 hours answering questions.
Clive Efford.
Mr. Speaker, the Taoiseach Leo Varadkar is quoted today as saying we have already offered a lot of concessions. We ended up with the backstop because of all of the red lines the UK laid down.
Yeah.
The EU leaders know that we have the backstop that was designed by the Prime Minister. Just exactly what is she going to renegotiate?
I have to say to the honourable gentleman, this is not a backstop that was designed by the United Kingdom. This is a backstop. The one aspect of this backstop, which was required by the United Kingdom, was ensuring that the customs territory was UK-wide and that we did not see a Northern Ireland customs territory. And that was what the EU wanted. We stood up against it and we delivered.
Carol Monaghan.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister and many on her benches have demonstrated an astounding ignorance of the history of these isles. So attempting to bully Ireland into a perceived compliance by threatening food supplies is utterly abhorrent. So can the Prime Minister assure the House that in any conversations, negotiations or interactions taking place, Ireland will be considered an equal?
Can I say to the Honourable Lady, the Government has not suggested what she suggested in her question that we have done. We have been... Ireland is currently a fellow member of the European Union. We, in the future, will not be a member of the European Union, but one of the things that I have discussed with the Taoiseach is actually how we can continue to ensure that our bilateral relations, which have been growing much stronger in recent years, can continue to grow well in the interests of the whole of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Mr. Andrew Slaughter.
Speaker, dragging the decision on her deal into the new year for what looks like tactical advantage is unfair on everyone. It's particularly unfair on businesses trying to plan for their future and for EU citizens who want to know their rights going forwards. Will she at least promise to bring that vote before the Christmas recess?
One of the important elements, of course, of the deal that we've negotiated is being able to give EU citizens the confidence about their rights. We have done that even in the circumstances of a no deal, should there be a no deal. What is important for certainty for the future and what will deliver all of these things for the future is actually this House agreeing a deal.
Kerry McCarthy.
I've had hundreds of constituents emailing me
to express their unhappiness with the Prime Minister's deal. And they're not troubled by the backstop. They're worried about their jobs, the economy, whether they'll be able to get their hands on life-saving medicines, whether food prices will go through the roof. It is self-indulgent in the extreme for us to be here putting off this decision day after day after day while the Prime Minister tries to save her own skin. She will not be able to come back with a deal that satisfies me that my constituents will not be worse off. Can she just get on with it?
That's actually what I am doing, is getting on with, finding a way through, yes, with listening to members of this House and then going back to negotiate on that basis. But I say to the Honourable Lady, that the deal has been negotiated with the European Union. If she wants to avoid the circumstances of a no deal, then she has to accept a deal. This is the deal that is on the table.
Alex Norris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was clear after the Chequers Agreement was announced that there was not a majority in Parliament for it. It's been clear after the withdrawal announcement was made that there's not a majority in Parliament. It's been clear after 3 days of debate that there is not a majority of Parliament for the Prime Minister's plan. In that time we have wasted months. Yes. Now the Prime Minister proposes to waste further weeks. Is the Prime Minister's new strategy to run the clock down to the very last minute to give us a false choice between her deal and the catastrophe of no deal?
Honourable members of this House will need to face the fact that there will be a choice between a deal, between no deal, or no Brexit. Between a deal, no deal, or no Brexit. There is no majority in this House for any of the alternative arrangements that have been put forward by members of this House.
Daniel Zeichner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister told us earlier that she'd been listening, but I'm afraid she's been a touch selective in what she's actually heard, because it's not just about the backstop. And can she level with the country and tell them that actually the political declaration isn't a deal, it's a series of shared aspirations, and the negotiations are likely to drag on for years and years and years.
The political declaration makes it very clear that this is that what will be negotiated will give effect to what is in the political declaration, if you like, its instructions to the negotiators. What is also clear within the deal that has been agreed is that both sides will use their best endeavours, acting in good faith, to achieve that negotiation by the end of December 2020.
Dr. Rupa Haq.
Mr. Speaker, 9 times the Prime Minister assured us that there'd be no early general election, and still it happened. As recently as this morning, her hapless, ever-changing band of ministers were out on the airwaves assuring us that there would be a meaningful vote tomorrow, before this latest twist, this sort of premature parliamentary ejaculation that has put the lie to the claim that she sticks to her guns. When she won't even tell us when the vote is deferred to, and it appears that the lady is for turning. How can we or anyone trust anything she says again?
I'm tempted to say to the Honourable Lady, if she looks carefully, I think she'll see that I'm not capable of a parliamentary ejaculation.
Thank you. Deirdre Brock.
Had to follow that one, Mr. Speaker. However, at 4:15 this afternoon, I received a written answer that stated the Northern Ireland Protocol guarantees that even in the event that the UK's future relationship with the EU is not in place by the end of the implementation period, there will be no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland and no splitting of the UK's customs territory. In so doing, the agreement preserves the economic and constitutional integrity of the UK, upholds the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and ensures people and businesses that rely on an open border between Northern Ireland and Ireland can continue living their lives and operating as they do now. Does the Prime Minister agree?
Yes, that's what we've negotiated, to ensure there will be no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland.
Anna McMorrin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. World leaders are gathering in Katowice in Poland this week to agree action on climate change, the single biggest issue facing us in the world today. But instead, here we are, embroiled in a massive act of self-harm, with unable to move forward, the pound at its lowest point in 18 months, locked in a stalemate, without any majority in Parliament for a deal. Please put this back to the people, not for the first time, not for the second time, but for the first time on this deal.
I refer to the Honourable Lady to the answer I've given her earlier. I would also point out to her that if she wants the government to be able to get on and focus on the issues that she's talking about, we have representation in Katowice. We are still working on the issues of climate change and other things, but going back on a second referendum will not help that process.
Nick Dakin.
Speaker, the Prime Minister admits that if she put the deal to this House tomorrow, it would be rejected by, in her words, a significant margin. So why is she behaving like the shopkeeper in the Deb Parrott sketch and insisting that this deal is not yet deceased?
Because, as I've pointed out, there is a specific reason why people have raised concerns about the negotiation. It is about the issue of the temporary nature or otherwise of the backstop, and that is what we are going back to the European Union to discuss.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. At the beginning of this process, the Prime Minister said she would reach out right across the UK to the devolved nations across the divide and agree a negotiating position before going to Europe. But she didn't. She made all the decisions herself, painted herself into a corner with her red lines, and what we have in front of us is a blind Brexit. We won't be putting this behind us for years because that 26 pages is just blather. It is nothing. It is clear that the fact that the Prime Minister won't allow MPs to vote and won't allow people to vote is that she's no faith in this deal herself. Is that not closer to the case?
No, it is not. And it is not the case that MPs are not going to be allowed to vote. There will be a vote in this House. There will be a vote in this House, but we will be negotiating on that issue of the backstop.
Brendan O'Hara.
I spent much of the weekend reassuring worried farmers, fishermen, distillery workers in my Argyll and Bute constituency that the stark choice being forced upon them between her deal and a hard no-deal Brexit was a false choice. And today the Prime Minister confirmed that I was right, that it was a false choice. So will she now accept that this was one cruel bluff too far, and that today, in the eyes of the public, she and her hopelessly divided government have taken self-serving political cowardice to a whole new level?
I say to the honourable gentleman that the two of the things that will be delivered by this deal are coming out of the Common Agricultural Policy and coming out of the Common Fisheries Policy. Those are both important for our agricultural sector and for our fishermen, because we will be able to deliver improvements for both of those sectors in the future.
Mrs. Sharon Hodgson.
Mr. Speaker, even by this government standards, the events of today have been extraordinary. My constituents will be looking on today in horror at what the Prime Minister is doing. There are just 109 days to go until we are due to leave the EU, and the Prime Minister doesn't have the confidence to put her own deal to a vote of this House. Every day this chaos continues, it damages the country. As the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, does not command a majority of this House any longer, will she step aside?
No, what we are doing is ensuring that we can have a deal which, look, for the confidence and certainty that her constituents want, I believe that it is important that this country agrees a deal that delivers for them on their jobs and livelihoods in the future, and that is what this deal does.
Kate Green.
The Prime Minister said that it was disquiet about the backstop in this House that was leading her to return to the European Union. But many of the 164 speeches that we've heard so far in this debate indicate that it is not just the backstop that is of concern, and it's also the case that my constituents have many other concerns about the deal that is on the table. So can the Prime Minister say to us when she is going to put this intrinsically unsatisfactory deal before this House so that we can vote on it?
I refer the Honourable Lady to the answer I gave earlier.
Liz McInnes.
Thank you, Mr.
Speaker. The Prime Minister has rather given the game away with her statement today. For as long as we fail to agree a deal, the risk of an accidental no deal increases. It would be monumental folly of any government to accidentally stumble into no deal. We've had 3 days of debate, let's have the next 2 and let's have a vote on her deal.
This is something that is a responsibility for members of this House when they come to look at the deal that the government puts before them, as to recognise what the potential alternatives are in relation to no Brexit or no deal.
Drew Hendry.
Mr. Speaker, what we've witnessed today is the evaporation of any lingering vapours of credibility from this Prime Minister and a government she leads in name only after this cowardly decision to postpone or stop this vote. After more than 2 years of Tory infighting in the backbenches and pandering to that and coming up with this mess, isn't it time she now took responsibility? And if the Leader of the Opposition has the backbone to bring a no confidence vote tomorrow, will she abstain or will she do the honourable thing beforehand and resign?
No.
Lloyd Russell Moyle.
The Prime Minister last year called an election because she understood clearly that in democracies you regularly go back to the people and you have a vote. After last week of her losing 3 votes in Parliament, she seems to have gone a bit cold on democracy. She doesn't want a people's vote, okay. She doesn't even want votes now in the House of Commons. When will we get to vote? What date will the Prime Minister set for a vote? Because I have no trust in this Prime Minister and I don't think the country does either.
I refer the honourable gentleman to the answer I gave earlier.
You want to do? What about the adjournment? I know I'll do the adjournment. Are you sure?
Paul Sweeney.
The Prime Minister just accept that the fundamental premise of this deal is not going to change, and no amount of sugarcoating is going to build a majority in this House for a fundamentally dead deal. So will the Prime Minister just face up to the reality of democracy and face the House of Commons, put it to a vote and allow Parliament to decide what happens next, instead of holding us all hostage to our own misfortune?
The fundamental premise of this deal is a deal that delivers on the referendum, respects the decision taken by the British people, and does so in a way that protects people's jobs and livelihoods for the future. I believe that's the right premise for the deal.
Stuart C. MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've heard absolutely nothing that justifies halting our debate, because if the red lines aren't going to change, then the deal is not going to be changed materially either. In the last few minutes, Donald Tusk has confirmed that the deal and the backstop cannot be renegotiated. So if the Prime Minister is intent on listening to this House, will she confirm that we will have a vote on whether or not to halt our debate?
Excellent question.
No, I have set out the position in my statement, and there will be a business statement to the House later.
Janet Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's good to hear that the Prime Minister has said that she is listening. But if indeed she is listening, what would she say to my constituent who voted in line with the Leave campaign and has said that he felt miserably misled and misinformed by that campaign, and has since said that he would like to make an informed decision like many others and have the opportunity to have a people's vote?
I say to the Honourable Lady that I have given an answer in relation to the people's vote on a number of occasions. I think 17.4 million people voted to leave the European Union. There are many people now who, she cites her constituent, there are many other constituents who, having voted actually to remain, would now vote to leave the European Union because they believe it's important for government and Parliament to deliver on that referendum.
Mr. Graham Jones.
Speaker, Prime Minister, was this the easiest deal in history?
I say to the Honourable Gentleman, I think if he looks back on the various statements I've made about tough negotiations and difficult choices being made, he will know the answer to that question.
Chris Elmore.
Mr. Speaker,
The only thing the Prime Minister has been consistent about in recent months is that her deal is the only deal on the table. So the reality is nothing will change with tweaking with bits and pieces, as has been confirmed by the Taoiseach for a start. So in that vein, can she confirm that her decision to delay tomorrow's vote does not mean that the requirement under the EU Withdrawal Act for a government to make a statement by the 21st of January if this House has not approved a deal has not changed?
No, but the legislation is clear on the position and the government understands that.
Yes or no?
Mary Rimmer.
Mr Speaker, the referendum was honoured when this chamber voted Article 50 through. The deal on offer or no deal are seriously detrimental to this country, with the most vulnerable of people set to be the one worst hit again. It is truth and honesty that is desperately needed in this country now. The people are entitled to it. It takes a brave person to be a true leader. But will you rise to the challenge and tell this chamber and the public that this deal and the no deal are seriously detrimental, and get out to the people? We cannot lead them over a cliff like lemmings.
The Honourable Lady started her remark, her intervention and question to me by saying that this House had delivered on the vote of the respected the result of the referendum when it triggered Article 50. If she follows through that issue, no, what triggering Article 50 did was started the process of negotiation. We will honour the result of the referendum when we leave the European Union.
Libby Abrahams.
Mr Speaker, I have no confidence whatsoever in the Prime Minister renegotiating the deal, amending the deal, the backstop or anything else. But given that the Prime Minister has refused to date to name when we may have a vote on this amended deal, will she at least stop the clock on the Article 50 process? Or is it really a threat, as it seems to have been in the response to many of my colleagues, a threat of her deal or no deal?
We've triggered the Article 50 process. I believe that we have a responsibility to deliver on the vote of the referendum. We put the exit date into legislation in this Parliament put the exit date into legislation, and we will be leaving on the 29th of March next year.
Ruth George.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister says that she wants certainty and protection for jobs and prosperity. But seeing as she's just about to try and ditch the only legally binding part of the future relationship, and she has a party which is seeking to ditch her and take us into a hard Brexit, what guarantee does her deal give to businesses and people in my constituency of jobs and prosperity that they want?
I say to the Honourable Lady, I think she seems to have misunderstood what I said in my statement when she says we're abandoning, appears to think we're abandoning in total the legally binding aspect of the deal that has been agreed. She talks about protecting jobs. That's exactly why we have negotiated and set out very clearly that ambitious free trade agreement for the future and the free trade area that would enable us to protect jobs up and down the country.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. After 2 years of telling us no deal is better than a bad deal, since our intelligence has been telling us a no deal is so catastrophic we've got to vote for her bad deal. And yet, at the same time, she says, don't worry, we've prepared for a no deal. The reality is, when it comes to a no deal, she had a Brexit secretary that didn't know how important the Port of Dover was. A Transport Secretary did not bother to visit the Port of Dover since June 2016 till October 2018. That's how far behind they are in no-deal preparations. Isn't she insulting her intelligence further by saying she's ready? Isn't the fact she's never had control of this situation?
The no-deal preparations will continue, as I said earlier in my statement.
Martin Whitfield.
For Mr Speaker, Donald Tusk has just tweeted that he will not renegotiate anything including the backstop, but will discuss how the UK will facilitate ratification. Given that a no deal would be a disaster, and the Article 50 hearing this morning stated that we could withdraw it, Is it not in the government's power, if we reach a point where there is a no-deal risk, that the government withdraws Article 50?
Revoking Article 50 means staying in the European Union. That was not what people voted for in 2016.
Hugh Gaffney.
I can also thank all the MPs on Postal Workers' Day for the extra meal on Brexit. On the morning after the referendum, Prime Minister, you said 2.5 years ago, I knew we had witnessed a defining moment in our democracy. Prime Minister, this is a defining moment in our democracy. Your deal has failed. So will you call a general election, or will you resign just like David?
Order. Sorry, the Prime Minister will finish her answer. We'll give her answer. Go on, give the answer, please.
No.
Can I just very gently say to members, in some cases it may be done for emphasis, in which case it is an abuse, and in some cases it may be inadvertent, but there is a dangerous tendency developing on both sides of the House, and we've witnessed it today, for members to keep using the word you. Debate goes through the chair, and you refers to the chair, and members shouldn't do that. I've been trying to educate the extraordinarily diligent and amiable member for Strangford for several years that he should not say, Minister, will you or do this, that or the other, and I don't want the infection to spread, if I can put it that way. Mr. Justin Madders.
I've had many constituents contact me about the withdrawal agreement, and I had hoped to speak in the debate later on to put forward their views and my own. And the Prime Minister said earlier that she wants to take members' concerns back to the EU, but how can she do that if she shuts the debate down tonight? Or do my constituents' views not count?
Good question. I think I've set out the position that I and the government are taking in the statement I gave earlier.
Thank you. Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister in her statement said that those members who continue to disagree need to shoulder the responsibility of advocating an alternative solution that can be delivered. Mr. Speaker, I came here today to make a speech in the debate and to advocate an alternative position and to vote tomorrow. The Prime Minister is clearly running down the clock, playing a dangerous game of brinkmanship for our businesses such as Jaguar Land Rover. Does she not accept that by denying Parliament the vote tomorrow, she is preventing any alternative solution to be proposed unless Article 50 is extended?
There are a number of alternatives that members of this House have already put forward in debate, and not just in the debate that has taken place for the 3 days so far. But so far there has clearly not been any consensus across this House for any alternative arrangement. The House will have to come to a decision about whether to go forward with a deal or not in due course.
Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has warned the House of the risk of dividing the country and the loss of faith in our democracy. Does she not recognise that if we press on regardless, if we take Scotland out of the EU against our will, on the back of a UK-wide vote which was only narrowly won, and won with extensive rule-breaking by the Leave campaign, that it does exactly that? And if she hasn't got the guts to put a vote before this House or the people, is it not time for her to resign?
Absolutely. I say to the honourable gentleman that, as I explained in the statement, we are deferring the vote so that we can have these further discussions with the European Union. But as I've pointed out to him and to his right honourable and honourable friends on a number of occasions, from the point of view of the economy of Scotland and jobs in Scotland, the most important thing, the most important element of their economy is actually staying within the internal market of the United Kingdom.
Order. Statement, the Leader of the House and Lord President of the Council, Andrea Leadsom.
Mr. Speaker, in the light of my right honourable friend the Prime Minister's statement, I would like to make a short business statement confirming the business for the remainder of this week. Tuesday the 11th of December, consideration of Lord's amendments to the Ivory Bill, followed by general debate on fuel poverty. Wednesday the 12th of December, remaining stages of the Courts and Tribunals, Judiciary and Functions on Staff Bill, Lords. Thursday the 13th of December, a general debate on public health model to reduce youth violence. Friday the 14th of December.
Order. The honourable gentleman is burbling away from a sedentary position and has been doing so on a recurrent basis throughout the last couple of hours. Now, he's displaying delinquent tendencies and I want him to curb them. The Leader of the House.
Friday the 14th of December, the House will not be sitting. I will make a further business statement in the usual way on Thursday.
Valerie Bass.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could I just clarify something with the leader? Did she say there was going to be a further debate after the Ivory Bill, or is there just going to be the Ivory Bill, because we didn't quite hear it properly? But can I thank the Leader of the House for the statement and the business for the next few days? Mr. Speaker, before I get to the matter of the deferred debate and the vote, I'd like to register the deep dissatisfaction that the government has announced a substantive debate on the remaining stages of the Courts and Tribunals Bill for Wednesday. This is an important bill, and proper notice should have been given to the House to ensure that members had proper time to table amendments and prepare to scrutinise this bill. By giving less than 2 sitting days' notice, it is now impossible for members to table amendments that will not be starred. But I suppose the Leader of the House is quite grateful that she won't have to vote on the bill, because on the withdrawal agreement, because it's been widely briefed that she never supported the bill. Mr. Speaker, on Tuesday the 4th of December, this House unanimously agreed a business of the House motion which sets the rules and timetable governing the meaningful vote debate. The Prime Minister has today unilaterally announced that she will, in her words, defer the vote scheduled for tomorrow and not proceed to divide the House at this time. Neither the Prime Minister nor the Leader of the House have today confirmed the date for the conclusion of the debate or the votes. This shows a complete disregard for Parliament and for the rights of the House, as well as the 164 honourable members who've already spoken, and I think there are almost the same number of honourable members who are about more than that who will plan to speak today and tomorrow. Once again, the decisions of Parliament are being ignored. It is clear, as she has admitted in her statement, that the Prime Minister has decided to avoid a heavy defeat on her deal in the House of Commons tomorrow. Again, Parliament has been given no opportunity to express its view on her negotiation. Mr. Speaker, you earlier set out 2 options available to the government to alter the business. The first, infinitely preferable option, is for a minister to propose moving to the adjournment so that the House has an opportunity to vote on this proposition. The second is that the government whip does not move the debate on the meaningful vote for today. It cannot be right that the government can unilaterally alter arrangements once the House has agreed on a timetable without the House being given an opportunity to express its will. The public will look at the behaviour of the government and how it treats their democratically elected representatives and despair, denying the vote because the government are going to lose. Our Constitution, Mr. Speaker, works on the basis that the government control the business of the House of Commons because they have a majority in this House. But the government appear to be avoiding a vote on a change to the business because they fear they do not command a majority. Can the Leader of the House confirm whether the debate will be resumed and completed this side of Christmas? Does she think it's reasonable to wait until Thursday before confirming the business for the final sitting week before Christmas? Can she also confirm that the House will rise for the Christmas recess on Thursday the 20th of December and return on Monday the 7th of Jan 2019? Can she confirm that Parliament will be given an opportunity to debate and inform the government's negotiating strategy with the EU? Can she confirm that they will not bring forward the implementation bill next week before Parliament has made a decision on a Section 13 approval motion? And most importantly, can the Leader of the House please confirm that the government will treat Parliament with respect, honour the terms of the original business of the House motion as agreed, and therefore seek to move a motion for the adjournment after the statements today, so that this House, not the Prime Minister, agrees whether to defer the meaningful vote.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for her questions. Just to repeat, Wednesday the 12th of December, she asked Tuesday the 11th of December, consideration of Lord's amendments to the Ivory Bill, followed by a general debate on fuel poverty. She asks about the business of the House motion. What I can say to her is that in strict procedural terms, our intention this evening after the ministerial statements is to defer the debate until tomorrow. Members will be aware that this is a very common procedure. The government often names tomorrow as the next date for deferring an order of the day. For example, we do this at the end of a second reading debate. It's then for government to decide when to bring that order back for debate, and that is in line with the normal convention that government decides on the order of business. She asks, will the House still rise for Christmas on the 20th of December and return on the 7th of January? What I can say to her is that the House has agreed that recess is accepted, and it is a matter for the House, therefore. So the House will rise for Christmas as planned. She asks whether there will be time for debate, and I can say to the Honourable Lady, Mr. Speaker, would you like to call for order?
I can actually hear what the leader is saying. If the leader wants to repeat the last sentence, because it wasn't remotely audible to me, I'm not suggesting that's her fault, but it simply wasn't heard. And it's important that what is said in this chamber is heard. So perhaps the leader would care to return to the box and repeat what it is she was saying.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Obviously, I'll be dependent on you to keep order in the chamber so that I can be heard.
Order. I have no difficulty whatsoever doing that, and I will continue to do that. What I'm asking the Leader of the House to do is to furnish the House with the information that was requested. I'm inordinately grateful to her. The Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the Honourable Lady asked whether the House will rise for Christmas recess as planned, and what I said is that the House has already decided that the House will rise for the Christmas recess on the 20th of December and return on the 7th of January. The Honourable Lady asks about time to debate Brexit. I can absolutely assure her, as she will know, that the government has a very good record in making sure the House has plenty of time to debate Brexit. During passage of the Withdrawal Act, both houses played an essential role in scrutinising and improving the legislation, with 37 days of debate spanning 11 months, with over 1,400 amendments debated and almost 280 hours given for time to debate. We've ensured regular debates in government time, including the two-day debate on European affairs in March and the debate on legislating for the withdrawal agreement in September. So I can assure all honourable and right honourable members that the government will make sure there is plenty of time for further debates on Brexit, including on the meaningful vote. What I can say to the House is that the government is under a statutory obligation under Section 13(1)(b) of the EU Withdrawal Act to have the withdrawal agreement approved by a motion in this House. In such circumstances, the business of the House motion agreed on the 4th of December will need to be updated through a further business motion. Thank you.
Sir Desmond Swain.
How firm should any plans we might make be for the first week in January?
As I just said to the Honourable Lady opposite, the House has already decided that it will return on the 7th of January next year.
Pete Wishart.
And thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Leader of the House for this hastily arranged and paltry business statement? And it's absolutely no wonder whatsoever
that this statement was given into shrieks of laughter by those on these benches. This is the ultimate humiliation for the Leader of the House and for this Prime Minister, and how they can look this House in the eye and try to suggest, pretend that this is business as usual is quite extraordinary. Our constituents are watching this farce with bewilderment and bemusement, with no idea how this country is being run, and the Leader of the House comes up with no way forward for all of this. This is the most extraordinary moment in our political life, a moment when people will ask, where were you on Brexit crisis day? We have now reached the biggest political crisis since Suez, with the biggest capitulation since Napoleon's retreat from Moscow. Now, I asked the Leader of the House last week if this vote would go ahead, regardless of what emerged or how much they feared defeat. She said it most definitely would. Even 1 hour before this huge U-turn, the government were still briefing that there would be a vote. Now there, of course, is no vote, and there might not be one until the 21st of January. A monumental act of political cowardice. Now, what we want to hear from the Leader of the House tonight, that it will be this House, and this House alone, that will determine whether we have that vote tomorrow. It must be number one of what the Speaker set out and how we address this. There must be a Minister come to that dispatch box and ask for this motion to be adjourned. We cannot have it anyway. It is up to this House whether it decides it should go ahead or not. 167 people have spoken so far. Half as many again were due to speak tonight or tomorrow. It is a huge disrespect to all honourable colleagues in this place. And the one other thing that we need to see on a business motion is an opportunity to test the confidence of this House and this government. There must now be a motion put forward after all that we've had, after the humiliation climbed down, after the things being withdrawn that we should be voted on. That is what this country now expects us to do. A vote of confidence in this government that will most certainly should be defeated.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman suggests that somehow this is a lack of respect. I think what this demonstrates is the Prime Minister has very carefully listened to the many hundreds of colleagues who have already expressed their grave concerns, myself included, in the issues around the backstop. The Prime Minister has taken those views on board, and she has ensured that she will now go away and seek further reassurances from the European Union before coming back to this place, so that she can seek an agreement that this House can accept. I believe that that shows absolute respect for this Parliament.
Mr. Patrick McLaughlin.
When we come to resume this debate, whenever that will be, will a continuation of the debate of the last 3 days, or will it be a new debate?
My right honourable friend is right to point out that we will require a Business of the House motion that was agreed on the 4th of December to be updated through a further business motion. And in terms of how that will precisely take place, that will be something that I'm keen to hear from all honourable and right honourable members on, and will of course be discussed through usual channels.
Then Bradshaw.
This government is once again showing complete contempt for this sovereign parliament. Why won't she put this shabby idea of taking this vote away from us, this sovereign parliament, to a vote in this House, rather than doing it unilaterally? This can only end very badly for the government if it continues to ignore the will of this House.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman makes clear that he wishes to undermine the will of the people of this country. So I think what the government is making clear is that we are determined to bring a withdrawal agreement to this House that the House can support in the national interest and in abiding by the will as expressed by the people in the referendum.
Mark Francois.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What the government have done today is shameful. It is a complete abuse of this House. Having been found in contempt recently, for the first time in living memory, they have now gone for a buy one, get one free. The whole House wanted to debate this. We wanted to vote on it. The people expected us to vote on it. And the government have gone and run away and hidden in the toilets. And people watching this on television will be confused and bemused and very, very angry at the way their own Parliament has let them down. The government front bench should literally be ashamed of themselves.
Well, I simply do not agree with my honourable friend's assessment. What the government is seeking to do is to go back to the European Union to get further reassurances so that this House can support a deal that is in the national interest. As the Prime Minister has said in her almost 3-hour statement just now, she recognises that the House, many honourable and right honourable members, have grave concerns about the backstop arrangements, and she is determined to see that resolved and then to come back to this place as soon as possible to resume the debate and have that vote.
Kate Hurley.
The greatest respect for the Right Honourable Lady, and I'm sure she's feeling very uneasy in what she's doing today. But could I ask her, given that Parliament has already decided that the government was in contempt, can she now bring back the legal advice for the rest of the withdrawal agreement, not just the backstop, but the rest of the legal agreement, which was the legal agreement of the rest of it, which was what Parliament asked for?
Well, what I'd say to the Honourable Lady is that the advice that was published was the final advice that the Attorney General gave to Cabinet on the 14th of November, and that was the legal advice that fulfilled the terms of the humble address. But to her point about the government not abiding by procedures, the government is absolutely abiding by procedures. As honourable members will know, we always, at the end of a second reading debate, name tomorrow, which basically in terminology of Parliament means not now. So it's either now or it's another time, and the terminology is tomorrow. That is normal House procedure. There is nothing unusual about that.
Justine Greening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister said she didn't want to go back to square one, but that's precisely what she's done with the termination attempt of this debate today. Like many other members, I represented my community last week, and they will be shocked, frankly, to see that this debate has now been curtailed. But can I ask her one question on the business motion she will bring forward? Will it respect the amendment made by the House last week to last week's business motion, and will she agree that that should be incorporated into any government business motion that it brings forward when it's finally ready to do so?
Well, as I've already said, the government is under a statutory obligation under Section 13(1)(b) of the EU Withdrawal Act to have the withdrawal agreement approved by a motion in this House. In these circumstances, the business of the House motion agreed on the 4th of December would need to be updated through a further business motion. The government, if the Honourable Lady will allow, I will answer the question. The government has never disputed the fact that any motion to approve the deal is amendable, and that hasn't changed.
Rachel Reid.
Follow on from the question from the Right Honourable Lady for Putney. Can the Leader of the House be clear on this? The Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman, the member for Beaconsfield, proposed an amendment which was passed by this House that meant that the government's bill on the Withdrawal bill would be amendable. Will the government, when you bring back the business motion, whenever that happens, will you ensure that the amendment from the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman from Beaconsfield is incorporated in that business motion to ensure that the bill is amendable by this House?
As I said to my right honourable friend, the government has never disputed the fact that any motion to approve the deal is amendable, and that hasn't changed. So that means that when the vote comes back to this House, the business of the House motion that was agreed on the 4th of December would need to be updated through a further business motion, and that in itself would be amendable.
Point of order. Afterwards.
and I will happily take the point of order afterwards. I still think at the end of this statement is preferable. At the end of this statement, I'm happy to take it if it is of procedural relevance, which I'm sure it is. Sir William Cash.
Will the leader of the House inform us as to whether or not the resolution of the House on the 4th of December relating to the Attorney General's advice will apply with respect to any further arrangements that may be offered to the House as a result of any further negotiations over the next week or whatever? Because if it is not the same withdrawal agreement, there must be a question as to whether or not that motion stands because it relates to something which happened beforehand and not as it emerges.
Well, my honourable friend will recall that the Attorney General answered significant questions and wrote a large document setting out all of the legal position on the withdrawal agreement. And I think that should there be significant changes, the Attorney General would certainly set out the legal position on any changes, but in direct response to my honourable friend, he will appreciate that the terms of the specific humble address he's referring to were met with the production of the Attorney General's advice.
Angela Eagle.
The Leader of the House is being extremely coy in her answer to the Honourable Member, the Right Honourable Member, the Member for Putney, and my Honourable friend, the Member for Leeds West, about whether the amendment to the motion which we were discussing before the government decided to pull it today, which was passed ahead of us starting the vote, which replaced the neutral motion that the government were planning to put to this House, which is unamendable, would actually be replaced with one that was amendable. Now, she's being asked twice by honourable friends on both sides of the House, and she's been very coy and not forthcoming in her response. Could she now confirm, and not just read out that phrase that she's read out twice already, that when we take this debate up again, the government's neutral motion will actually not be neutral, it will be amendable, because the government will accept the spirit of the vote that was had before we began the original speech.
Well, I just repeat to the Honourable Lady that any business of the House motion brought forward will be amendable.
I mean, can I just say, I'm trying to be helpful to the House, you know, what others seek to do is a matter for them, but so far as I'm concerned, it's very clear that the amendment in the name of the Right Honourable and Learned Gentleman, the Member for Beaconsfield, was agreed to by the House, and that amendment stands unless it is specifically repealed by a subsequent decision of the House. I think, unless I am mistaken, and colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong, that was the assurance that a number of members were seeking. And it is, if I may say so, on advice, and I do say so on advice, a very straightforward point, the thrust of which I have, I think, pretty easily confirmed. Mrs. Anne May.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I think it's a real shame for the Leader of the House that we did not come to the conclusion that this vote wasn't going to get passed a lot earlier. Then we wouldn't have gone 2/3 of the way through a debate. It cannot be right that we don't have a further 5 days when it is brought back, because everybody puts into debate at the time, and in theory, if we only tag on another couple of days, some colleagues will get the ability to speak twice, and some colleagues won't get the ability to speak at all, given that several hundred people have already spoken, and several hundred more wish to speak. And it cannot be right, Mr. Speaker, in my view, that we have a debate that only limits it to potentially 2 days, meaning that some colleagues have never had a bite of that cherry, whatever side of the House they are on.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for her points, and I can absolutely assure her that I am committed to representing the views of Parliament and Government, and I will listen very carefully to the needs of honourable members across the House. The exact arrangements going forward will be subject to the provisions in a Business of the House motion, which the House itself will have to agree.
Kirsty Blackman.
Mr. Speaker, businesses and business organisations are hugely concerned about a Tory immigration bill that won't allow them to attract new migrants, skilled migrants, in order to do jobs here. Can the Leader of the House let us know when the White Paper on Immigration will be coming forward and when the immigration bill will be coming forward?
Well, I certainly share the Honourable Lady's desire to see that bill as soon as possible, and I can confirm to her that we expect to publish the White Paper before the end of the year. It is absolutely vital that we have an immigration system going forward that is fair to those businesses who need to attract employees from overseas, but at the same time fair to those people in the UK who voted for the UK Parliament to be able to control our borders.
Order. Can I just very gently say, and with good humour, to the Honourable Lady and to the House, that this is a relatively narrow business statement that the Leader is delivering, and the questioning on it should be similarly narrow or focused, if I can put it in those terms. Focused, that is to say, on the business of the House for this week and changes thereto. It should not be an occasion for general inquiries about future business at some unspecified point in time. The Leader signalled that there would be that regular business statement on Thursday, so I appeal to colleagues now to focus their inquiries on the more specific and narrow subject matter. Vicky Ford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The items that have just been put on the agenda of addressing fuel poverty, reducing youth violence, the workings of the courts and helping endangered species are all very important issues to our constituents. So can the Leader of the House confirm
Order, can I just appeal to order. Look, as usual, everybody will have the chance to put a question. The Honourable Lady is putting her question, which she's entitled to do, and she must be heard with courtesy. Vicky Ford.
Speaker, I don't laugh about issues like addressing youth violence. Can the Leader of the House confirm categorically that this House will have time to debate and vote on the meaningful vote?
Well, first can I say my honourable friend is exactly right. These are important debates for the rest of this week, and I think that honourable and right honourable members I know do care a great deal about these issues, and I absolutely do confirm to my honourable friend that the government is under a statutory obligation under the EU Withdrawal Act to have the withdrawal agreement approved by a motion in the House. Without such approval, the government would legally be unable to ratify the withdrawal agreement.
Gavin Robinson.
Mr. Speaker, I find today's events to be wholly unsatisfactory, both in terms of today's debate and tomorrow's debate being rescheduled, but also that I should put some store in the aspiration of getting a meaningless assurance. I don't, Mr. Speaker. As somebody who was due to speak in the debate today, to represent the aspirations and the wishes of people who support my view and those who don't, can I ask the Leader of the House what efforts will be made to ensure those of us who haven't contributed thus far have the opportunity to do so and honour our constituents, their views, their wishes and the aspirations of them and this House?
Well, can I say I completely understand and appreciate the honourable gentleman's desire to represent his constituents' views, whatever they may be, and I absolutely applaud that. I am listening carefully, and when it does come to resuming the debate, all efforts will be made to ensure that there is enough time given for all those honourable and right honourable members who haven't yet spoken to be able to do so.
Spreading that nonsense. Maggie Throop.
Because 62% of my constituents voted to leave the EU. I'm sure that was with a good deal, not any deal. So does my right honourable friend agree that the steps the government has taken today is the right way to ensure my constituents get what they voted for?
Yes, I completely agree with my honourable friend. It's been absolutely vital that the government listen very carefully to the grave concerns expressed about the backstop, and the Prime Minister has spent the best part of 3 hours assuring the House that she intends to go and seek reassurance about those important points raised, so that this House will then be able to support that deal, which in the government's opinion will be in the best interest of all of the United Kingdom.
George Howarth.
Earlier this afternoon, when she made her statement, the Prime Minister said that she'd been heavily influenced by speeches that had been made in the debate. The difficulty, Mr. Speaker, is that there are many, many more people who wish to speak in the debate whose voices have not yet been heard. Doesn't the Right Honourable Lady, the Leader of the House, accept that this is very discourteous to those members? And will she also accept that the habit of contempt seems to be coming hardwired into this government?
I would say to the honourable gentleman that this is the opposite of contempt. This is a Prime Minister who is listening. And if I may say, since the House returned from recess in October, the Prime Minister has spent over 20 hours at the dispatch box in total, which is more than equivalent to a 30-minute session of Prime Minister's questions every day that the House has sat since October. She has listened carefully to concerns, and honourable and right honourable members should appreciate the fact that she is now going to seek to address those concerns before coming back to this House for that meaningful vote.
Matt Warman.
Is it not obvious that it's in the national interest for the Prime Minister to spend a few extra days getting a deal that is in the national interest?
Yeah, my honourable friend is absolutely right. It is vital that we take into account the concerns in this House. This is an enormous decision that is before us, and what we have to do is to address all the concerns that have been raised and come back to this House when we have something that we feel members across this House will be able to support.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a farce. I and the other members of the Treasury Select Committee have spent days toiling to produce a report for the biggest vote that this generation, that this House will face, only at the last minute for it to be pulled in favour of the Lord's amendments on the Ivory Bill. But this is a farce, Mr. Speaker, that has real costs. Sterling is tumbling and we face a crisis. I must say to the Leader of the House, bring forward the vote. It has to happen.
I assure the honourable lady that it will happen.
Mr. Peter Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can't be the only member in this House who has turned down a number of requests this week to attend pre-Christmas events in my constituency. People understood I had to be here because of the business. Now they understand that none of us needed to be here today. Not for the first time, Mr. Speaker. For purely party political advantage, the government have played fast and loose with last-minute changes to parliamentary business, all of which comes at a cost, a significant cost, of unnecessary travel and accommodation booked by MPs who would not have made those bookings had the government come clean last week about the plans. So given that the business this week has inexplicably and unexpectedly become much lighter, can we find time for a short debate to consider how much of that additional cost should fall on the taxpayer and how much should be refunded by the Conservative and Unionist Party?
But what I would say to the honourable gentleman is that these are sitting days, and his duty, as all of us members of this House, is to be in the chamber. And if the honourable gentleman chooses to not be here, that is a matter for him. But these are sitting days, and there is important business of the House going on tomorrow with the Ivory amendments to consider, and then a very important debate on fuel poverty.
Ian Murray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Maybe the Leader of the House could consider changing the name of her party to the Conservative and Contemptuous Party for the way they treated the Sovereign Parliament over the last few days. I was due to speak today, not so the Parliament could hear my voice, but so they could hear the voices of my constituents, many thousands of whom have emailed me over the last few days to ask me to speak and make their voices heard. Will the Leader of the House come to the dispatch box and offer them an apology?
What I would say to the honourable gentleman is that we will make sure that there is time for all honourable and right honourable members to be able to express their views, and it is absolutely vital that the Prime Minister be given a little time to go back and look again at the backstop issues so that all honourable and right honourable members will be able to support this bill.
Gavin Newlands.
In channeling the member for New Forest West, on a matter of huge parliamentary and procedural significance, is this it?
The honourable gentleman will be aware that the government has decided that the Prime Minister should seek to address the concerns raised by honourable and right honourable members further before coming back to the House with a meaningful vote so that we can address those concerns. I believe that that shows complete respect for this place.
Mr. Richard Bacon.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the House said a few moments ago that the Prime Minister spent 3 hours reassuring us that she's going to seek some reassurances. Does the Leader of the House understand that when a motion is brought back for us to vote on with the withdrawal agreement, that the only thing that will make a difference is changes to the text of the withdrawal agreement? Does she understand that?
Well, first, I'll just point out to my honourable friend that the Prime Minister actually was here answering questions on all aspects of the withdrawal agreement. She wasn't here simply reassuring people, she was listening to all honourable and right honourable members. And in answer to the second part of his question, yes, I think the Prime Minister absolutely fully understands that there are serious questions about the backstop and a desire from honourable and right honourable members to see changes to the legal text.
Chris Bryant.
It's sad, really. We often boast about our historic freedoms and liberties, and often we preach to other countries about how to run parliamentary democracy.
Yeah, we do.
But to be honest, this is a prime example of how not to do it.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
The government, I would have had respect for the Leader of the House and the government if they'd come forward with a motion saying, all right, we'll put it to the House that we're not going to put it to the House. But they're instead relying on a shabby little trick where a government whip will just shout tomorrow, which in this Parliament doesn't mean tomorrow, it means mañana, it means never. It's a shabby little trick. And isn't the ultimate irony of all that the government is preventing the people from having a vote on it, it's preventing the Commons from having a vote on it, but the House of Lords is going to vote on it tonight. What's good enough for Earls and Barons is good enough for us.
Well, the honourable gentleman knows that that is a bit of parliamentary pantomime. He knows full well that the government often names tomorrow as the next date for deferring an order of the day. So after a first reading, when naming the date for a second reading debate, if it isn't now, then it is tomorrow, and then the government decides. There is nothing unusual about that at all.
Mrs. Helen Goodman.
The Leader of the House knows that tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow creeps in this petty pace from day to day. Will it also be to the last syllable of recorded time?
As I've said to a number of honourable members, we will bring the meaningful vote back to this House. There will be a further business motion that will be amendable as soon as the Prime Minister has been able to seek the reassurances that will enable this House to support a motion that will be in the national interest. That is in the best interest of the whole of the United Kingdom, and it's vital that we get it right.
Alison Thewlis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents sent me here this week to vote against this deal. I spent the weekend trying to explain to people the processes of this House, the process that would happen, and what might occur afterwards. What am I to tell them now?
that the Prime Minister is seeking the reassurances that will enable the House to support a deal that works for the whole United Kingdom.
Mike Gate.
Mr. Speaker, the Leader of the House has announced that we're going to be debating the Ivory Bill. Isn't the reality that the big elephant in the room is the statement this afternoon by the European Union Council President, Donald Tusk, that the European Union is not prepared to renegotiate the withdrawal agreement at all. So isn't that the reality? It shows that this whole proceeding is a total farce.
Well, in congratulating the Honourable Gentleman on a proper piece of parliamentary pantomime, I just think that the basis of his argument is flawed. He will appreciate this is a negotiation. The UK has a strong hand. It's vital that the European Union understand that the United Kingdom needs reassurances about the backstop.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I was wondering if the Leader of the House can tell us if an abandoned debate's like an abandoned football match whereby people's names are expunged from the records. And secondly, who's going to take responsibility for this farce first? Is it going to be the Prime Minister? Is it going to be her as Leader of the House? And who's going to walk first?
As I've said to many honourable members, the purpose of changing the date of the vote is to enable the Prime Minister to address the very real concerns as expressed by many honourable and right honourable members.
Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was hoping to speak on the withdrawal agreement on behalf of my constituents this evening and will now be denied that chance. Can the Leader of the House tell me if it is now government policy to reopen negotiations on that withdrawal agreement and change its text, something many government ministers have said was not possible in recent weeks?
The Prime Minister intends to seek to address the concerns that have been expressed about the backstop and our inability to unilaterally get out of it. That's what she's seeking to address, and she will absolutely do her best in the national interest.
Anna Turley.
In the previous statement, the Prime Minister made the only argument against the people's vote in being that it will make people lose faith in democracy. Could you tell me what on earth the British public must be thinking about our democracy on a day the Prime Minister runs away from losing a vote, when she's had ministers out defending her deal for days and days, and hundreds of MPs are unable to speak to represent their constituents? Who's making a mockery of our democracy now?
I simply think the Honourable Lady has it exactly the wrong way around. The Prime Minister is listening to this House and is acting on what she is hearing from this House. It's an entirely different matter to a second referendum that simply tells all those 17.4 million people that they got it wrong.
We're streeting.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can we just put paid to this nonsense that the reason we're in this mess is because we have a listening Prime Minister? The Prime Minister's come to the House today and made out that the reason she wants to go back to negotiations is because speeches in the first few days have been the biggest surprise to her since the Immaculate Conception. This is absolute nonsense. If she'd listened from the outset, she would have realised that the Chequers Agreement didn't command a majority of this House. Why is the government determined to repeat the same mistake again by rushing back to the negotiating table, not to renegotiate the withdrawal agreement, but just to try and get a few paper-based compromises? Why can't we have a substantial debate in this House this week about what our negotiating objectives should be, so that we got the support of the whole House before the negotiations, rather than losing to the House after the negotiations?
Well, first, I think the Honourable Gentleman could at least appreciate the number of hours the Prime Minister has spent in this place listening, and the fact that it's precisely because she has been listening to this House that she is going back to the EU to seek to address the concerns raised by this House. Honourable members should appreciate that fact.
Thank you. Sangham Debonaya.
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow would mean 108 days until the date of Brexit.
If the Prime Minister and the Leader of the House intend to put it off for what, another month? That would mean we were down to 77. What then? Will the Prime Minister simply pick up the goalposts, run down the football pitch, position them then where she thinks the ball might land, and if it doesn't, pick them up again and run a bit further for another 31 days? How long is this farce going to continue? Because frankly, I can hear the sound of belief being beggared in Bristol West from here.
The Prime Minister will return to this House to resume the debate in order to pass a meaningful vote once she has sought those reassurances.
Dr. David Drew. Mr. Speaker, it's the role of the Leader of the House to present the government's case to this chamber. But it is also the role of the Leader of the House to reflect what this chamber says and does. Will she now go back to the next cabinet and really reflect on the anger that is being felt across this whole House and give us a meaningful vote?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman makes a really important point. I do take my role very seriously to reflect Parliament's views in government as much as government's views in Parliament. So yes, I most certainly will take that very seriously. But on the question of the vote, I think equally all honourable members must appreciate that it was quite clear that the will of the House was that further work should be done to ensure that the UK could not be held in a backstop against its will, and therefore the Prime Minister is seeking to address that before we come back to this place to resume the vote.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is the Leader of the House not a little bit ashamed to be here today, running away from its own major policy? A government showing complete contempt for this House, for all views in this House. There are many members in here who don't agree with me on Brexit, but they are going to be stifled from not being able to speak and not being able to vote on this as well. And we are not able to represent our constituents properly. Let's be clear about what really is going on here. The Prime Minister is playing for time, a few more days into next week, to go away, to get some sort of exchange of letters. She can't renegotiate the withdrawal agreement. Donald Tusk has made that very clear. It's a legally binding document. So why doesn't the government just accept reality, put this question before this House, and if this House doesn't agree, put the question back to the people?
Well, first of all, obviously the Honourable Gentleman is quite wrong. I'm not running scared. I'm actually here at the dispatch box. So he's simply wrong. To his point about what the Prime Minister is seeking to do, he will appreciate that in order for the government to ratify the withdrawal agreement, it does require that the meaningful vote be passed in this House. And the Prime Minister is seeking the means by which to ensure that she can win the vote in this House.
Dr. Philippa Whitford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Basically, it can't have come as a surprise to the Prime Minister that so many people spoke against her deal. That's been clear for months, if not a whole year. As one of the 164 people who have spoken in this debate, and indeed sat here for 8 hours and spoke at 25 to 1 in the morning, are we talking about a continuation? Or do the speeches of the 164 fall that we need to apply to speak again to have counted as speaking about the meaningful vote?
Well, the Honourable Lady will appreciate that there are discussions through usual channels about exactly what the House, the business motion of the House would look like, and the matter of calling speakers is a matter for the Chair.
Ian C. Lucas.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister told us repeatedly today that there was no new deal and that the text of the deal would not be changed. Donald Tusk has confirmed that. So the deal will not change. She is preventing members from speaking in a debate on the deal. What is the purpose of deferring the deal when it will not be, the vote on the deal when it will not be changed?
The Prime Minister has been clear that the vote will take place when she believes she has the legal assurances Parliament need that the backstop will not be permanent.
Here you go.
Come to
in the debate and reflect the wishes and views of my constituents. So I'm extremely disappointed that the Leader of the House and the Prime Minister have decided to pull the rest of this debate and to cancel the vote tomorrow. She also appears to be making sure that this is done in a way in which the House isn't able to vote on whether it should happen or not, despite the fact that Mr. Speaker said earlier that it would be infinitely preferable to allow the House to make its views known in a vote. It seems to me that the Leader of the House and this government are increasingly trying to avoid votes in this House. And does she not realise that that is untenable going into the future? It won't stand, and that finally this House is going to assert its rights over this appalling government.
Well, the Honourable Lady will be aware that scheduling business is a matter for the government, and that the proposal for the rescheduling of the meaningful vote therefore is, under normal procedures, a matter for the government, and that is what we intend to fulfil.
Lord Russell Moyle.
The government has already been found in contempt of this House, and now they wish to, of course, be in contempt of the British people. I was due to speak later on today, but I and my constituents will be denied that. When will the debate be rescheduled? Give us a date, or at least a time frame, because otherwise, based on past practice, there's not much else I can believe about the Leader of the House's promises without details.
Well, as I've said a number of times, we will resume the debate as soon as possible once the Prime Minister has sought the reassurances that the House has made very clear that it requires that the backstop will not be permanent.
Paul Sweeney.
The Leader of the House's job is not only to bring government business to the House, but also to uphold the integrity of the institutions of both government and Parliament in the wider country. How does this look to my constituents, hundreds of whom have written to me in the last few days, anticipating this debate, anticipating this meaningful vote, now to see this spectacle of gerrymandering and tawdry and arcane manipulation of parliamentary rules to suit a Prime Minister who's failing and dead on her feet? Can the Leader of the House actually stand here with any degree of integrity and uphold that situation?
There is really nothing unusual in using the deferral of a vote to tomorrow. It is used every time we have a first reading when scheduling a second reading.
Debbie Abrahams.
It is unacceptable for the government to change business of this magnitude with so little notice. It is equally unacceptable that we still have no date for a meaningful vote. So will the Leader of the House commit to come to this House on Thursday with a date for this vote?
As I've said on a number of occasions to a number of honourable members, the Prime Minister is determined to address the expressed concerns of many members of this House, and once she has been able to do so, she will return to this House, and that will be as soon as possible.
Clive Efford.
The Prime Minister wanted to take us out of the European Union without a meaningful vote in this House. The Leader of the House has said resume the debate on several occasions. Now, will the 164, of which I am one, will get the opportunity to make another contribution to a new debate, or will we be resuming the old debate?
Well, the Honourable Gentleman is asking about who will be called to speak, and that is a matter for the Speaker.
Kevin Brennan.
The Leader of the House is making a mockery of the procedures of this House of Commons. It is not the same as a first reading and a second reading, because the difference here is that there is a motion of the House already in existence for the debate to take place today and tomorrow, and she is going to ask her whips to perpetrate the fiction of saying that this debate will continue tomorrow when she's already announced it'll be the Ivory Bill, because she's afraid that if she put it to a vote of this House, she would lose. She knows she'd lose. So why doesn't she just admit that and be honest with the House?
I have been absolutely clear with the House. The Prime Minister has listened to the views of this House as expressed in recent weeks and is determined to address the concerns that have been raised, because what this House needs to do is to be presented with a withdrawal agreement and a political declaration that members across this House can support. The Prime Minister made quite clear that she did not feel confident that members would be able to support it, and it would therefore not be in the national interest to go ahead with it until she has managed to address those very real concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Leader of the House not realise the fury that there is in this Parliament about the way in which she's changed the business? Does she also not realise, the Leader of the House, one of the great offices of state, the Leader of the House is supposed to speak for Parliament. She's supposed to be the voice of Parliament to the Cabinet, not the voice of the Cabinet to Parliament. And isn't it the case that people outside will look at the statement the Leader of the House has made and look at it with incredulity? A vote that every single person in this country was expecting tomorrow is to be denied. The people of this country will feel disenfranchised, and they will feel that we have a Leader of the House that speaks for the government and not for Parliament.
I take my duties as Leader of the House extremely seriously, to be Parliament's spokesman in government as much as government spokesman in Parliament. I absolutely assure him of that, and so I am listening very carefully, but nevertheless it is in the national interest that we go away and seek further reassurances before coming back to this House for the meaningful vote.
Diana Johnson.
The leader would stop talking about the national interest when what she's actually talking about is the Conservative Party's interest. What I wanted to say to her is that this House passed a business motion with specific dates and times for the debate to take place. Now, the government can choose, of course, when to schedule business, but once there's a business motion that we agree that we will debate and we will have a vote at a certain time, I really fail to understand how the Leader of the House can stand there today and say that it's acceptable for one of the whips later on to shout tomorrow for the continuation of the debate when we're actually going to be debating the Ivory Bill tomorrow and not the bill that we've all agreed in this House that we want to debate.
I understand the Honourable Lady's concerns, and I can assure her that the Government will return with the meaningful vote once the Prime Minister has addressed the concerns expressed by Honourable Members right across this House. It is simply not right to say that the Government is looking at Conservative Party interests. The Government is looking at delivering on the will of the people expressed at the referendum in 2016, where a significant number of people voted to leave the European Union. That is the absolutely essential task of this government in bringing back this meaningful vote.
Drew Hendry.
It cannot be comfortable for the Leader of the House to come here to front up this sorry excuse for an act of political cowardice. Has she heard today the voices of the majority of honourable and right honourable members in this House who see this as a further contempt of this place?
I always listen very carefully in this place, and I continue to do so, but I simply don't agree. I think it's essential that we bring back a withdrawal agreement that members can support.
Good God, I just removed the words.
Andrew Slaughter.
Mr. Speaker, the government has pulled the most important business this House has debated for a very long time in the middle of the debate, which is extraordinary. What's more extraordinary is that the Leader of the House has given no indication about when that debate will be resumed. Tomorrow. As soon as possible isn't good enough when millions of people in this country, particularly EU nationals, futures depend on it. So if she won't give us a day or a week, could she give us a month when this debate's going to take place?
Gentlemen will appreciate that the government is under a statutory obligation to have the deal approved by a motion in this House. Without such approval, the government would legally be unable to ratify the withdrawal agreement. So in order to bring forward the legislation that would enable us to enter into that withdrawal agreement, we will need to make that as soon as possible, and so the honourable gentleman can rest assured that that will be the case.
Susan Ellen Jones.
Mr. Speaker, I don't wish to be disrespectful, but the Leader of the House sounds rather like somebody who's telephoning to postpone a dental appointment rather than actually change the schedule. This is incredibly serious. But I also think it's incredibly serious that the theme debate for today, which is now not going to happen, was about the Union. And many, many people across the length and breadth of the United Kingdom with very different views had really important perspectives on that. Can she assure us that that matter will be discussed again, and when will that happen?
I can assure the Honourable Lady that that matter will be discussed again as soon as possible.
Elmore.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the House has been reminded several times that her role is to represent Parliament at the Cabinet and not the other way round. I would politely say to the Leader that it wasn't about amending anything, it was about this House wanting to vote down the deal tomorrow. In terms of the Procedure Committee report, of which I am a member, the Leader has previously confirmed that they would follow the recommendations of the Procedure Committee. So whenever this farce comes back, can she confirm that there will be 5 days of continuous debate as has been set out previously? That is the only thing that the House will accept.
I just point out to the Honourable Gentleman that my job is indeed to represent Parliament in government, but also government in Parliament. And it is in the interests of this House that we get a deal that all honourable and right honourable members can support. With regards to the exact arrangements going forward, there will be a business of the House motion which the House itself will have to agree.
Western.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whether constituents voted leave or to remain, they want to hear this debate and they demand and expect decisiveness from this place. Can I ask, therefore, the Leader of the House that for the future debate that we should have at least 5 minutes, given how important this debate is to the future of this country? And can I also ask her to confirm whether this debate and vote will actually be before or after the New Year's honours list has been published?
The debate will come back to this House once the Prime Minister has been able to reassure those honourable and right honourable members who have concerns about the backstop arrangements. That will be as soon as possible.
Jones.
Following on from the question from my honourable friend the Hull, last Tuesday the government, the Prime Minister, brought to this House a programme motion that included the words a debate on Tuesday the 11th and tomorrow in the programme motion. Can you explain to this House why you voted for that, why the government voted for that, you the Leader of the House voted for this, why the Prime Minister voted for that programme motion when actually it's going to be cancelled, the debate today and tomorrow? Can you explain why you voted for it and brought it forward?
I think the Prime Minister has explained that very clearly, that she has listened to the House over the last 3 days of debate, and she has concluded that she needs to do more to reassure members prior to having that final vote on the meaningful vote. So a business of the House motion will need to amend the prior business of the House motion so that we can have that meaningful vote once she's sought those reassurances.
Mr. David Hanson.
The Leader of the House is becoming a bit of a serial offender when it comes to moving business. 3 weeks ago she moved the Offensive Weapons Bill on 2 occasions because the Conservative Party members would not support it. Today she's now going to move through a shabby device the closure of business down today when people like myself, who promised my constituents I would speak on this matter today, have not had the chance to do so. Will she just make me one promise? When she stands at that dispatch box, will she keep to her word?
Well, I can assure the Honourable Gentleman I always keep to my word. The issue with the Offensive Weapons Bill was that there were some very significant statements made on that day which would have meant that there was not adequate time for the very important sets of amendments that were subject to particular knives to be actually discussed in time. That's why that business was pulled. This business is being changed so that the Prime Minister can seek assurances that many honourable and right honourable members would like her to seek.
Carol Monaghan.
Good choice, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was due to speak tonight to represent the views of my constituents, and I'm extremely frustrated that I'm not going to be given that opportunity. But I'm also suspicious about the timing of when this will return. So can the Leader of the House assure us that this business will not return in the week beginning the 24th of December?
I can give the Honourable Lady that assurance.
Yeah, Malcolm MacDonald.
Speaker, as they say in Glasgow, the game is a bogey. Because when the government is scared of a bogey, when the government is scared of its own shadow, Mr. Speaker, it's a government that doesn't deserve to be in office. So given that a confidence vote is now surely inevitable in the not too distant future, can she confirm that there is no parliamentary instrument or trickery that she can deploy on behalf of the government to prevent that from taking place when it's called?
Well, I just don't agree with the Honourable Gentleman. The Government is actually taking action to address the expressed concerns of Honourable and Right Honourable Members. With regards to the Fixed Term Parliament Act, the Government does have the confidence of the House. If the opposition were to dispute that, it is for them to test it via a motion under the terms of the Fixed Term Parliament Act.
Thank you. Order. Statement. The Secretary of State for exiting the European Union. Secretary Stephen Barclay.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I will now make a statement on the judgment issued by the European Court of Justice this morning on the Whiteman case. Mr. Speaker, today the European Court of Justice has delivered its judgment on the question of the revocability of an Article 50 notice. The Court has found that the UK has the right, in accordance with its constitutional requirements, to unilaterally revoke the notification of its intention to withdraw from the EU. We note the judgment from the European Court. It is their role to provide rulings on the interpretation of EU law. This judgment clarifies the law. The judgment does not in any way change our policy. That the government knows this course is possible, just as many undesirable actions are possible, does not change the fact that such an approach is hypothetical and the government has no intention of doing it. The government's firm and long-held policy is that we will not revoke the Article 50 notice. This position has not changed. To do this, or indeed to hold a second referendum, would be to undermine the result of the 2016 referendum and the professed will of this House to give effect to that result. This House voted to hold the referendum and promised to deliver it. 544 members of this House voted to give the British public their say, with just 53 opposed. Almost 3/4 of the electorate then took part in the 2016 referendum, resulting in 17.4 million votes to leave the European Union. This is the highest number of votes cast for anything in the UK electoral history, making this referendum the biggest democratic exercise in our history. This House then voted again to empower the Prime Minister to notify under Article 50 and voted yet again to repeal the European Communities Act. The government remains focused on its task and its mandate and delivering a deal which honours the 2016 referendum result. We will be leaving the EU on the 29th of March next year. I commend this statement to the House.
Jenny Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement. Mr. Speaker, yesterday Andrew Marr asked the Secretary of State whether the meaningful vote was going to be delayed. The Secretary of State said, "The vote is on Tuesday. That is what we are focused on." Now, I must say to the Secretary of State that I know he is the new boy on the block and he's very keen to impress his new boss. But like his two predecessors, I fear he's being left out of the loop. Seeing as we've all got a bit more time this evening and tomorrow, can I ask when it was that the Secretary of State learned that the meaningful vote would not take place tomorrow? It's being reported that the requirement for the government to make a statement to this House by the 21st of January on no deal would no longer apply following the Prime Minister's decision to defer the vote. Can the Secretary of State clarify whether this is or is not the case? If he hasn't already, will he seek legal advice on this matter and make an urgent statement to this House tomorrow? The government's incompetence is not an excuse to threaten this country with no deal. Turning to the substance of the Secretary of State's statement, this is an important and clear judgment from the European Court of Justice, and it makes 3 points. First, that Article 50 can be unilaterally and unconditionally revoked. Second, that doing so would mean the terms of the European Union membership are unchanged. Third, that revocation could bring the withdrawal procedure to an end. Now, we welcome the clarity that this ruling has brought. The government, however, sought to block this case even being heard by the European Court. So can the Secretary of State confirm how much taxpayers' money was spent on trying to obstruct this predictable decision? Could he also make clear that if Article 50 is extended due to the government's failure to negotiate a deal by the end of March, that the court ruling states the UK could still unilaterally revoke Article 50? We have always been clear that the revocability of Article 50 is a political matter and not a legal one. Today's ruling underlines that. This country is yearning for political leadership from ministers. Is it not the case that when a government is too scared to put votes to this House that it ceases to function? This is a government in name only.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, turning to the first point, the Prime Minister, over the course of 2.5 hours, has addressed that, I think, in full detail. But in terms of the substance of the Honourable Lady's remarks, she will know that the judgment was very clear, that the revocation would need to be unequivocal and unconditional. And the question for the Honourable Lady and for the front bench opposite is how could serving such a notice be in any way compatible with the manifesto that the party opposite stood at the last election? They made a clear commitment to their electorate, many of whom voted to leave, that they would not seek to revoke Article 50, that they would honour the terms of the referendum. And the government's policy has not changed, and what they need to address to the House is whether their policy has indeed changed. It is a matter of policy that we will not revoke Article 50, and therefore this is a hypothetical question, but of course the government made its case, as it always will in the courts. But our policy has not changed. The question for the bench opposite is, has yours?
Mr. Kenneth Clark. Mr. Speaker, as I've listened to today's proceedings, the chances of the government getting its withdrawal agreement ever approved by this House seem to me to be quite slight, and I can't think of any assurances she's going to get in Brussels which will change that, in my opinion, most unfortunate situation. I decided the whole thing was not contrived to save the House from my making a speech tomorrow where I would have supported the withdrawal agreement. But the situation therefore is grave, because with no withdrawal agreement we're going towards March the 29th and we will leave with no agreement at all, because there's no signs of any alternative emerging of any kind. So Article 50 does have to be looked at. Now, does my honourable friend agree that just adjourning, just suspending Article 50 can only be done for 2 or 3 months? There are legal problems just deferring it for any length longer than that. So, although the House regards itself, the majority do, as bound by this opinion poll or referendum that we held in 2016, in which absolutely none of the circumstances of the now talked about were remotely discussed with the public before the vote was taken, isn't the obvious thing to consider the government to start considering revoking Article 50 to save us from the disastrous consequences of leaving with no deal for our economy, our business, our employment, and many other things. And if anybody can ever put this shambles back together again and wants to resume the process of leaving the European Union, they can go ahead and see if the future House of Commons is ever more receptive than this one's been.
Well, the Secretary of State replies, can I just say to the Right Honourable and Lady Gentleman, the member for Rushcliffe, that I hope he derives some succour from knowledge of the fact that he has at least delivered a fair share. It's not for me to say precisely what share, but a fair share of the speech to which he would have treated the House tomorrow if he'd had the opportunity to do so. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I'm sure I and many in the House would have much enjoyed hearing the remarks of the Right Honourable Gentleman, but the point is that he, to be fair, has always been consistent. He didn't vote for the referendum. He has always taken the view that this House should decide. But many others in this House did vote for the referendum, and they also voted by a very substantial majority to trigger Article 50. And so I come back to the crux of the issue. The policy for this government hasn't changed. We are not going to revoke Article 50. But if the party opposite is flirting with doing so, then it needs to square that with the manifesto